In front of a reddish core, the man wondered if this was really how it would all end. Feeling defeated for having failed, he believed the hero should have been someone else, not him. Meanwhile, the woman with the staff begged her brother Evan not to think that way. Everyone there knew they had done their best to reach an ending different from that tragedy. Even so, he thought that if the genius had trained a bit more with the sword, he would have won. They were talking about the great Code who, due to his talent in learning anything instantly, earned the nickname Cody Juventus, given after many achievements throughout his long battle journey. The person in question had started at the age of 20, dreaming of success and wanting to escape his poor family. Then came the invasion of the Demon Empire, led by the merciless blood-tainted Demon King. That time became known as the Era of Destruction, spreading fear among most of the population. The nobles wanted to join the hero, and pamphlets were scattered across every corner of the continent. The hero thought everything was fine, as it was a unique chance to join the greatest warriors. He believed that with great victories and the end of the war, he would be rewarded with riches and glory, but they were defeated and the light group eventually fell before the blood-tainted Demon King. Now what the protagonist truly wanted was to go back in time and choose another hero instead. However, at the same time, he felt like he had already suffered enough in that life, perhaps he'd do it differently. The three of them knew that the world was about to be completely destroyed very soon. He looked at the light approaching and knew that was the end, but still insisted on getting another chance. With eyes closed, he wished to be born as the son of a rich family, with no absurd hardships. That was the wish he made before his former life finally came to an end without regrets. When he got the chance to live again, he looked at his hand lit by the morning sun and found everything strange. He knew he had returned, and by the looks of it, realized he wasn't in his usual body. He had come back in the body of the young master of the Demon Empire, belonging to the House of the Shadow Demon. As the name suggested, it was one of the 12 great families that ruled over that vast empire. Upon arriving in that life, he noticed that he had returned about 15 years in the past, which unsettled him. At that moment, it was 5 years before the beginning of the Era of Destruction, and he saw many strange beings around. He watched them through the window and thought he would never see anything as bizarre as demonic gardening. Besides that, when he looked in the mirror, he knew exactly who that child in the dark reflection was. It was the infamous Christian Van Baron of Khazard, known for shameful and cruel acts. From his past life, he knew that judging by the name Ivan, it must be a powerful noble clan. He also knew that the Count's house was a branch of the Baroness's family from the Shadow Clan. At the time, he wondered if that family was small, but understood that even as a branch, they were still clans. Everything happened that way because he was extremely rich, and everyone in the clan knew him as a walking disaster. He knew that among the heirs of that family, there were 2 sons, and the first was that Christian. He didn't bother being modest and caused terrible accidents wherever he went. Rumors said that even the Count had given up on that son, but now the rumors had changed. He had been annihilated by his own family, and just knowing that made the protagonist break out in a cold sweat. He was furious for being in the body of someone so despicable. He just wanted to be an ordinary rich kid. He tried to go back, but the moment he did, he arrived in a place full of monstrous demonic beings, and the worst part was the body he returned to. He thought it didn't have to be that infamous body. Even so, now he urgently needed to think of a way to avoid a tragic end. 3 days had already passed since he woke up and coincidentally inhabited a body with the same name as before. The problem was that the original owner of that body had been executed 2 years later by the Count, a man who valued honor above all, which meant he was even worse than people said. He knew that if he just stayed quiet, he wouldn't be able to avoid that end, even as a rich child. Still, no matter how much he thought, there seemed to be no way to succeed in the body of someone so hated. Ragnarok was near, and the cause of the war had been the Demon King's desire to use humans as sacrifices. By the time he realized it, it was already too late, and he could no longer stop that tragedy. The Light Group and the Demon Empire were both destroyed, so to survive, he had to change fate. The blood-tainted Demon King, who started the war, was also the greatest problem of them all. Countless demons from the clans followed him, and to stop that, someone would have to surpass him somehow. He was certain that the only path was to become the Demon King and take the top of that clan. There was little time left until the Era of Destruction, about 5 years, maybe less if the war started early. Knowing that, he needed to carefully calculate his next steps, because if he stayed still, he'd be destroyed like before. Moreover, he was interested in conquering the entire empire, but at that moment he was being scolded. The rule was clear: he had to remain confined to his room, especially after the accident he had caused. The Count warned that if something like that happened again, he would cut off his head without hesitation. That's why the protagonist remained silent. He knew his father wasn't joking or making empty threats. He then said he needed to apologize for the mistakes he had made up to that point in his life. Apologizing was the first step in his plan to change the terrible image he carried. But the things he had done were so bad that even apologizing felt like mockery. Although everyone said a terrible accident had happened, he couldn't remember any of it. Now he used the memory loss as an excuse not to admit he didn't know what they were talking about. Whenever they looked at him, they said the son had deeply reflected on his past actions. To try to redeem himself, the protagonist asked to be sent to the punishment cell, wanting to show he was truly sorry. The punishment cell was a prison reserved for high-level criminals. The mental draining effects that place caused were exactly what the protagonist needed at that moment. The father looked at his son with suspicion and asked if he was truly determined to stay in the punishment cell. The protagonist stated that he knew well the hardships that place imposed. He said it was the least he could do to regain his father's trust. Very distrustful, the father recalled how many times his son had already failed and deeply disappointed him. Even so, he decided to give him one last chance to truly redeem himself. He made it clear, however, that this would be the final chance, and he would have only 1 month to change. If he didn't truly change, he'd be banished from the clan, which in practice meant his death. The protagonist knew there was a long list of people who wanted his head once he lost the clan's protection. He looked at his father and stated that he fully understood his position, but promised this time it would be different. He asked his father to grant him a single wish if he managed to endure the month of punishment. That attitude, considered arrogant, made his father's expression tighten, as he thought it was too bold of him to make demands. Even so, the patriarch responded that he would grant one wish if he showed genuine change. While preparations for the punishment cell were being finalized, the protagonist handled other pending matters. As soon as everything was ready, the butler appeared and informed the young master that the cell had been properly prepared. With that, the protagonist simply cast a glance at Cox, his half-vampire butler, and began to move. Along the corridor, the servants were already whispering to each other about the young master's punishment. Many believed he was planning something, since he had done strange things multiple times before. There was even a time when the Count had to personally apologize to a rival because of his son. As Christian walked, the servants whispered about how shameful it was for the father to take responsibility for his son's actions. They also debated how long the young master would last in the punishment cell. Some said he wouldn't even survive 2 days. Others believed he wouldn't last a single night. And at that moment, his younger brother watched in silence. After crossing the long corridor, they finally reached the door of the punishment cell. The protagonist raised his eyes and noticed that Death Knight stood guard at the entrance. That matched the magical empire well, which didn't care about methods as long as they prevented invasions. It was at that moment that the younger brother appeared and called his name. When they turned, they saw the image of the clearly nervous but determined boy. Even so, the protagonist was glad to see a familiar face. After all, that was his younger brother, an exemplary student. Thurn van Barenkassar, wasting no time, positioned his sword close to his older brother's neck. The protagonist simply kept his gaze steady, closely watching the boy's every movement. Thurn had a serious expression as he held the sword firmly, without hesitation. Christian, with a stern tone, asked the boy what he wanted with him, reminding him that he used to be afraid of his older brother. The younger brother, furious, said that Christian was the shame of the family and that he was ready to face him. With a firm and direct gaze, he said that the protagonist was the rotten apple of the clan and demanded to know what he was plotting. Still holding the sword raised toward the protagonist's neck, he said that this was his final warning. At that moment, the protagonist wondered if perhaps it was Thurn who would eliminate the real Christian in the future. He remembered that, years ahead, he had met Thurn as a demon known for his powerful cursed magic. But now, all he saw was a brat who didn't yet know the true terror of the era of destruction. When he told his brother to leave, the boy couldn't believe the sudden change in his older brother's behavior. Even after the warning, the protagonist turned around and prepared to enter the punishment cell. As soon as he stepped in, the door closed, and the younger brother remained outside, stunned by the visible change. Now only the magic guards, the half-vampire butler, and young Thurn remained, confused by what had just happened. Visibly shaken, Thurn asked the butler what that unexpected reaction from his older brother had been. Meanwhile, inside the cell, the protagonist walked slowly, observing his surroundings. He tried to identify any useful detail, but all he saw was immense darkness with no sound or presence. He was certain that the cell had been truly designed to drive any human being insane. Only the sensation at his fingertips could be felt, as if it were meant to provoke extreme sensory overload. He understood that an ordinary person could easily go insane in such an environment, but he had faced worse during his time as a bounty hunter and had learned to shut off his senses. With that, he decided to suppress all senses in order to better observe the interior of the punishment cell. He knew this required time, discipline, and luck, but he trusted the medical skills he had acquired. On top of that, he had mastered the art of bone compression, part of a body modification technique he had learned at the circus. With a combination of those techniques and magical stones of various properties, he knew he could achieve his goal. He was surprised by his own luck when he managed to acquire the rarest of the magical stones. He recalled that, even with all his experience in his previous life, it had been extremely difficult to find those stones. He decided to start with a white magical stone, known for purifying toxins, a tedious but essential process. He knew he needed a complete cleansing from the inside out, with the help of white magic. Even the smallest mistake during the process could cause excruciating pain throughout his body. Aware of this, he handled the stones with extreme care, properly channeling the concentrated magic within each one. With all the accumulated experience of a previous life, the process, though delicate, was relatively simple for him. After the butler returned, Christian's father wanted to know how he had behaved when entering the punishment cell. The butler replied that he was extremely worried about the young master's state, thinking he might not even be able to ask for help. At that moment, Christian's father began to wonder if he had made a mistake by sending him there, considering his son still had a promising future. He couldn't understand how such a talented child had been corrupted so suddenly. He thought perhaps the talent had made his son become far too arrogant. Still, regardless of the reason, he believed it was better to restrain him immediately than to let him live a miserable life. He certainly didn't want to lose him, but admitted that the person his son had become lately wasn't the same as before. Even so, the Christian he saw just before entering the punishment cell seemed completely different. He knew he shouldn't get his hopes up, as his son had already deceived and disappointed him on other occasions. That's why he asked the butler if he had noticed anything strange about Christian's behavior when entering. Noticing that the butler was sweating suspiciously, the master ordered him not to omit any detail and to reveal absolutely everything. Given that, the butler confessed that, in fact, the young master had brought some magical stones with him, including a few with hallucinogenic properties. The butler had even requested that the cell be opened due to the risk, but the father denied the request, thinking it would be a sign of weakness to give in. 1 month later, the master of the house stood before the punishment cell, awaiting his son. He feared the worst, believing the boy would not have survived a full month inside, especially after having taken those dangerous substances. To his enormous surprise, the door was opened from the inside, revealing a completely lucid Christian. The protagonist could hardly believe it when he saw his father's wide-eyed stare at the cell entrance. With a smile on his face, he greeted his father calmly, not expecting that he would actually keep his promise to visit. With a hint of provocation, he asked if his father was surprised to see him in perfect condition. As he had promised, he was safe and sound, and said he was ready to become a new man from that moment on. He looked straight into his father's eyes and declared that he would no longer repeat the same mistakes as before. The master of the house observed his son's gaze and recognized in his eyes the same light from childhood. Those eyes carried a hope he hadn't felt in a long time, for he hadn't seen such a clear look in years. He asked his son, with a smile, if he had truly managed to endure all that time, and Christian took it as a compliment. The father, however, tried to maintain his seriousness and told him not to get too full of himself, as he hadn't yet regained his trust. The protagonist explained that he hadn't had time to go mad, as he first focused on making his body fit for sword training. He also said that the Dream Stone had made a big difference, working perfectly alongside the White Mana Stone. He recalled how the half-vampire butler was anxious about letting him take something like that into the cell. However, thanks to the hallucinations it caused, he was able to shorten the time needed for metamorphosis and even form 2 cores. During his time in there, he managed to create a spell and even generate a magic star, something only a true genius could do. There was no need to mention that he had used a dark core to conceal the light core, making it invisible to demon eyes. He didn't want to be discovered, knowing that if he were, the demons would cause a scandal that would only make things worse. On top of that, something unexpected happened during his confinement. Someone had mysteriously delivered a dream stone to him. He remembered asking the person if they really wanted to give him that stone, but he didn't know who it was. He only knew that the intention seemed to be to break him completely, but he accepted the challenge. He decided to use that stone as a sacrifice to boost his progress. Now face to face with his father, he said that he had fulfilled his promise and wanted the agreed-upon wish to be granted. His father stared at him for a few moments and asked what the request was. Christian revealed that he wanted permission to access the training field of the Black Swamp Knights. His father, however, found that absurd, believing someone like him shouldn't even be near that place. He made it clear that only elite knights were authorized to demonstrate their skills in that field. Even so, the protagonist clarified that he didn't want to join the order, only to observe the best warriors in action. He believed that watching the elite knights train would be extremely useful for his growth. The firmness in his words made his father fall silent for a moment, reflecting on the proposal. With little more to say, the father eventually allowed it, but warned that he must not interfere with anyone. However, Christian had a second request, which left his father even more surprised. The next day at the training field, the knights carried on with their usual routines. Suddenly, an unexpected presence drew the attention of many there, making them glance disdainfully toward one side. It was the protagonist preparing himself with sword and gloves, ready to begin his journey. To the other soldiers, that young man was known as the Foolish Master and was constantly mocked. But Christian had another reason for being there. He sought a letter of recommendation from Vice Commander Merlin, which would allow him to request the key to the library. That was his second request, for within that place were stored all the black magic grimoires of the Count's house. To truly learn about black magic, one needed access to those grimoires. However, his father imposed a specific condition. The protagonist didn't fully understand the reason, but he knew he had to accept it. He couldn't enter the library freely, as in a past occasion, he had tried to sell advanced grimoires on the black market. Upon discovering this, Christian reflected on the kind of life the former owner of that body had led. Even so, earning the vice commander's recognition was a priority, and he was determined to achieve it. So he walked calmly through the training field, ignoring the hostile stares that followed him. And as soon as he spotted his younger brother among the warriors practicing, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of irritation. Soon after, however, he realized he could use that to his advantage, turning that annoying presence into a valuable opportunity. The younger brother didn't waste any time and went straight to confront Christian, saying he should go back and not risk his life. However, the protagonist began to provoke him, asking if he could truly stand by those words to the end. He made it clear that his presence on the training field had been authorized by their father. Upon hearing that, a new figure approached and declared that she respected the Count's decision, but still had something to say. She stated that she did not consider young Master Christian worthy of remaining in that sacred place of training. As the protagonist turned his gaze, he saw that the one speaking was none other than Vice Commander Merlin. He immediately recognized that the dark aura surrounding her was at least 4 stars strong, indicating she had been trying to intimidate him from the start. Even after realizing that he resisted the pressure of that energy and could still smile and greet her, she hardened her expression while listening to what she called nonsense. Christian knew he would have to prove right then and there that he was qualified to be on that training field. He extended his hand toward his brother and suggested they duel against one of the demons present. The younger brother thought this went far beyond a simple provocation, but the protagonist assured him it wasn't a joke. He only asked that his brother avoid using dark magic, knowing that due to his lifestyle, his energy reserves were limited. The vice commander considered that she couldn't allow a duel, as she couldn't risk injuring the heir of the house. She believed Christian wasn't ready for a confrontation and therefore suggested he choose another opponent. Thurn found the idea of dueling his older brother in front of everyone completely absurd. The vice commander was aware of Thurn's potential and thought it would be better if Christian fought someone less experienced. After all, the boy had already reached the 2-star level despite being only 13 years old. However, for the protagonist, talent wasn't an obstacle. He believed true worth was proven by fighting someone stronger, which is why he chose the best among them. He looked directly into his brother's eyes and asked what he had to say. He stated firmly that if he wasn't afraid, they could fight unarmed. At that, Thurn accepted the challenge, and the two stood face to face, ready to fight. Before starting, the protagonist asked the vice commander what the rules would be to decide the winner. She found him extremely insolent, but declared that the fight would continue until one of them was unable to go on. Christian started provoking his brother, asking if he had heard the rules clearly and what he planned to do about it. The younger brother replied, saying he would make sure he could never talk or walk again. As he spoke, the protagonist surprised him with a slap to the face, initiating the fight without warning. The strike sent a surge of rage through Thurn's body, exactly what Christian wanted. He knew that, taken over by anger, his brother would lose control and leave openings in his defense. He warned his brother that the duel had begun. Thurn, with a hand on his face, glared at his older brother with hatred and contempt. Now overwhelmed by emotion, he could no longer maintain the same level of performance as before. Christian knew that, even as a demon with no stars, he had the advantage against an emotionally unbalanced opponent. Besides, he had already taken part in unarmed duels in his previous life and knew that fighting style well. During his time in the punishment cell, he had reached 3-star mastery in light magic. Right after landing a blow to his rival's abdomen, everyone saw Thurn bend over in pain. Meanwhile, the older brother stood tall, openly challenging the younger. Thurn wanted to understand what trick his older brother had used to hit him so easily. The protagonist, armed with the real Christian's memories, took pleasure in seeing the one who had mocked him so much now being humiliated. Now he was the one mocking his brother, calling him weak and ridiculing him at every turn. He didn't hold back his words in belittling him, returning every humiliation the original Christian had suffered. He continued until Thurn, consumed by rage, unleashed his dark magic. As soon as that happened, the protagonist reacted with enthusiasm. It was exactly what he had wanted. He wanted to test his progress in a real confrontation against someone using dark magic. He raised his arm and blocked Thurn's attack, even though it was fueled by an intense flow of evil energy. Seeing his magic dissipate without even touching the target, Thurn was completely confused. In that moment of hesitation, he lowered his guard and was struck by a blow from the protagonist, who fought with sharp instincts. Christian took advantage of the opening and continued hitting until his brother fell unconscious. The final impact threw Thurn to the ground, kicking up dust and impressing everyone present. The final blow left several of the demons there speechless. It wasn't something commonly seen. No one expected young Master Thurn to be defeated so easily, especially considering his reputation. Contrary to what some believed, Christian had not held back the force of his magic to spare his brother. The protagonist then looked at the vice commander and asked if that had been enough. Though she suspected something unusual, she ended up agreeing with the outcome. Now Christian was satisfied, as everything had gone exactly as he had planned. The protagonist, despite already having 3 stars in light magic, had recently achieved his 1st star in dark magic. That happened because he still wasn't used to handling the aspects and demands of dark magic. He thought that to use the power of light and dark power simultaneously, he would need to level up first. Right after ringing the bell, within seconds his personal mate appeared, the one named Maya. He could hardly believe they were using a high-level spirit, a banshee, to serve as a maid. He seriously considered replacing her, but then simply told her to prepare a juice, as he planned to drink and then train. The half-demon maid asked if she should prepare the juice with human liquid, but the protagonist preferred strawberry juice. Despite her attempts to convince him that human liquid was better, he truly preferred strawberry juice. While he was calm and at ease, someone called out to him in a familiar voice. When he turned his head, he realized it was his half-vampire butler, concerned about the young master's physical limits. The butler said he was glad he was being so diligent, claiming to be the only one who accepted the situation without criticizing him. However, Christian looked at the man and replied that he had never asked anyone to believe or disbelieve in him. With that, the butler seemed bothered by what he heard. Bowing immediately, he apologized, admitting he too had overstepped, and wished the master a good training session. The protagonist simply watched as the butler turned his back and left, visibly displeased. He noticed there was something odd about the butler and decided he should keep an eye on him. For now, he returned to the training field, to the shock of many. Even while impressed, Christian realized that the eyes of his opponents had softened. He thought to himself that now, with their guard down, was the time to win them over. He picked up his sword and began walking toward a nearby warrior. After saying something to that warrior, he entered a tent to speak with the leader. Upon arriving, he spoke with the vice commander about something that had been said to him. He commented that young Master Christian was back at the camp, though she said nothing in response. She merely thought that it made no sense for someone like him to frequent such a place, given his lifestyle. She also couldn't stop thinking about the duel, as young Master Thurn's movements had been undeniably impressive. She still couldn't believe he had deactivated his dark energy at the exact moment. She believed that if that were the case, he might have the talent to surpass the direct heir of the main family. For now, he was just a failure who had lost all his dark energy due to the life he had led. She had to leave her quarters because of the noise outside, and wanted to know what was happening. Well informed, she learned that the young master was involved in a small conflict. From afar, she noticed he was challenging a one-star demon and had emerged victorious. She understood then that he too had reached the one-star level. The protagonist, resting his sword on his shoulder, said he only wanted to witness the famous prowess of the knights. Then he looked at everyone and asked if they weren't all just big cowards. One of them stepped forward and introduced himself as Turin, claiming he would be the young master's next opponent. Now the protagonist was satisfied. He had taken the bait. With a typical burst of rage, that man lunged at the protagonist, who had never imagined it would be so easy. He knew they wouldn't teach him their secret techniques, so he had no choice but to steal them. That would be his method, challenging them one by one until they each revealed their secret moves. By simply observing once, he managed to handle the sword properly to see if the next movement would work. Upon executing the move, he realized not only was it possible, but he had done an excellent job, considering even the vice commander was left speechless after seeing him replicate the move he had observed. That was the confirmation he needed to be sure his move was correct. As soon as he defeated that demon, he looked at the vice commander and noticed the way she was watching him. She couldn't believe he had a ruined dark core and still managed to reach the one-star level. Now it was clear she hadn't been wrong, but he still found it disappointing. It felt like there weren't enough knights. All the others were cautious at the thought of facing him, and even trembled. When he heard the vice commander ask him to calm down, he replied that he should show her what he had learned, or that she herself could demonstrate the skills of the Black Swamp Knights. That was enough for her to release all her magic and reveal the core of her true power. The force was so intense it slashed the ground near the protagonist, who didn't even flinch. Seeing that he wasn't intimidated even before such power, she grew even more irritated. She warned that she could take care of someone like him in just a few seconds. With that, he proposed that they use dark magic only up to the level of 1 star, and that black magic would be forbidden. She believed that 1 star would be more than enough to teach him a valuable lesson. She said she would break both his legs for everything he had done. He understood that she was challenging him, putting his legs on the line, but he wanted to know what she would offer in return. As she prepared to attack him, she said she would give him anything he wanted, because she was certain she would win. On the first strike he defended, but he was only analyzing the strength she used. That initial blow didn't pose much difficulty for him to withstand, so he managed to block before she repeated the strikes in the same direction. Meanwhile, the other disciples believed he was holding up well, since he was fighting the vice commander. Unlike what they imagined, the reason he was holding his ground wasn't because of her main weapon, a large sword. She had already noticed that when he fought his brother, the previous battle had followed the same pattern. He saw that she seemed dissatisfied and asked if things weren't going the way she had expected. That made her even more irritated, and she ordered him to shut up. Now the tension would be put to the test, as she gripped the sword firmly and prepared to strike. Once again, he observed the amount of energy she was trying to release at him before attacking. As soon as he sensed the attack, he realized he had to wait for the right moment to act. When he saw the opportunity, he simply managed to dodge an intense strike. For him, a genius, it wasn't that complicated. He just needed to watch her carefully. When the chance came, he didn't hesitate and charged at the woman, headbutting her. That caused her to break her magic flow, as she didn't expect a headbutt in the middle of a magical duel. A small nasal mishap made her eyes widen, shocked that she had been struck by someone like him. With a serious expression, he thought the strategy had worked, knowing that Merlin was like a magical sword. As long as her black magic was blocked at the moment her defense was down, she wouldn't be able to stop the attack. He also knew that, if Merlin had been a demon focused only on swordsmanship, the blow wouldn't have worked. The woman, after realizing she had been hit, began to laugh strangely, as if she found it amusing. She turned to the protagonist and said she hadn't expected a headbutt to work. It seemed she had underestimated him. Pointing to her face, she said the fight was over, which made her notice the scratch caused by the headbutt. She also remarked that if he had coated his nails with poison, she wouldn't be standing right now. Smiling, the woman accepted the defeat but asked that they fight once more in return. He thought a rematch was an excellent idea, but he wanted to ask her for something else, so he stepped closer to speak more privately about what he wanted. He whispered that next time they fought, if he won, he wanted her to kneel before him. She replied that she couldn't do that, as her loyalty belonged to the main house of the Barum clan. He said he knew that and added that it would be nice if one day he became the young lord of the clan. She listened, but thought none of it made sense, since the 5 young lords with rights to succession were direct descendants of the main family. He, however, stated that there was no rule preventing him from becoming a lord. He agreed to the rematch as long as she could wait a month, and said that next time the fight would have no limit. She warned him that if that were the case, he wouldn't stand a chance. Watching her, he said that few things in that world were truly impossible. With those words, he made her fall silent, analyzing what she had just heard. After that, he bowed respectfully and said that within a month, they would meet again. And so he secured the recommendation letter as his father had requested and showed it to him. Christian told his father that the demon's foundational techniques had flaws and they needed to train more. Hearing that, the Count recalled what the Vice Commander Merlin herself had said about the young master's achievements. On that occasion, she mentioned that even with a low ranking, he had defeated other demons with solid foundations. She also said that she had even been defeated by him, and that although it was a strange fight, she had enjoyed the experience. Now the man looked at his son in surprise. He had truly impressed him that day. The man stared at him so intently that the protagonist had to ask if there was something on his face. Of course, his comment was ignored, and his father simply, as promised, handed him the key to the library. Finally, the protagonist could enter the library and read the magic books he needed. Inside, he was ecstatic, for he had obtained the library key and changed Merlin's opinion. She was a demon from the main family of the magical clan, and during the era of destruction had been an active 6-star demon. He knew that to control the entire clan, he would need someone like her as his subordinate. As he walked away, he thought that even Count Khazar had feelings. He wore a different expression, as if showing the pride of a father. With that display of fatherly affection, he even considered the possibility that he might have a better father in this life than in the previous one. That's why he didn't want to disappoint Count Khazar. As soon as he entered the library, he was amazed. Everything sparkled, and he knew the magic he needed was in those books. Now he would need to study summoning, as well as curses and blood magic, which were forbidden in the domain of light. But that wasn't the case here, and he could freely take the books and marvel at their contents. When he finally pulled a book from the shelf, he was met with the satisfied gaze of his personal maid, Maya. He immediately flinched, not knowing what Maya was doing hidden among the books. The demon maid said she had once been a librarian in that place, so she knew the books very well and where to find them. Striking a strange pose, she asked if he wanted to monopolize her as his personal servant. Even for a demon, he found that behavior quite forward, but still, his heart raced. Maya, observing the book the young master had picked, told him it contained 4-star magic called Binding. She said that, in his current state, he likely wouldn't be able to understand the book's contents. But Christian tilted his nose up and claimed that it was fine, because he was a genius. The demon maid, used to living with that boy, knew he was extravagant and a liar, so she decided to tease him, saying that besides being a cutie, he was also very studious. Then she asked if there was a special reason why he had chosen that particular book. After studying for a while, he returned to training with the group on the field. He knew that among them could be the first potential traitor, his younger brother, who had been his target from the start. The second suspect was the butler. Even though he wasn't a descendant of the clan, he had free access to the punishment chamber. He also believed it could be someone still unknown, since they had received a dream stone. Now he would need to keep acting like a spoiled young master, because whoever the traitor was would be pleased to see him that way. So he began his performance in the middle of training, complaining that it was too hard and that he wouldn't continue. Striking a disinterested pose, he turned his back and told the others to keep trying and have fun. The team that had been training hard with him couldn't believe he might once again choose the wrong path. Their behavior toward the servants, even in front of the Count, remained the same as before. Even with his father asking Christian to stop acting like a child, the boy didn't stop. With the act he was putting on, the Count thought he was being naive to hope for his son's maturity. Thus, Christian could only watch as the Duke left, disappointed by the young master's behavior. Deep down, he felt bad, but he knew that what he was doing was for the good of the family, and that he needed to catch the traitor. With that, he worked hard to spread rumors that he was going back to his old ways. To do so, he acted rudely toward the maids while they worked. He spent money like it grew on trees, buying useless things. He pretended to be drunk while drinking fake wine and treated his personal maid poorly, just to test her. She was saddened to see him drinking wine even though he was underage. She asked why he had decided to act recklessly again, but still chose to stay by his side until the end. He told her that it was all a ruse because he needed to find out who the traitor was. She was amazed to see him manifest the binding seal, and he explained that he had modified the spell to match his level, which was still extremely low. Seeing all of that, she thought he really was a genius. Meanwhile, the younger brother opened the bedroom door. The protagonist continued pretending to be collapsing from drunkenness. Seeing his brother worried about his condition, he kept playing the drunk and asked what he was doing in his room. When he realized the boy was saddened to see that his brother had supposedly gone back to being like before, he decided to tell Thurn that there was a traitor among them, and that's why he had to pretend. Someone wanted him to fail and was planning to make him believe he was in control. He brought the glass near his brother's nose so he could see and smell that it was fake wine. Now the brother wanted to know who the traitor was and whether he had already discovered it. The protagonist said it would be difficult to say at that moment and that he would need to investigate a little more. However, he warned that they could bite the bait at any moment, so he threw the wine glass on the floor. As soon as he did that, a servant who was outside ran to attend to the young master. It was a substitute butler, standing in for the half-vampire butler. Still pretending to be drunk, the genius insisted that he wanted to speak directly to the butler. When he found him, the young master continued to act like he didn't care what the butler was doing. Meanwhile, the butler asked what the young master needed so he could try to assist him. At that moment, the protagonist took the opportunity to pour the bottle of fake wine over the butler's head. Smiling as he poured the wine, he said that it wasn't the drink he had ordered. The butler replied that he would immediately send another bottle to the young master's room, but the protagonist pointed a finger at the butler, saying that he should go get the wine himself. Although the butler said he was busy with other tasks, the young master insisted. He said the butler shouldn't do a sloppy job because that was unacceptable, and since he needed to change clothes anyway, he could take the chance to fetch the wine. Trembling with rage and hatred, the butler bowed his head and told the young master he would return shortly. And so the butler left, while the protagonist, sitting at the small table, watched him go. He had done all of that to measure how far the butler's patience would go, how long he would endure being humiliated. He had also sensed a certain hostility in the butler, and with the papers on the table, he decided to keep a close eye on him. When he picked up the pages still stained with wine, he was able to read the contents. That gave him what he needed, undeniable proof of Cox the butler's betrayal. He thought that if the butler were the traitor, he'd be making some financial adjustments. Still, that wasn't enough as evidence. He needed more proof. As he thought about this, the butler returned, still wearing his stained clothes. Mocking the butler, the protagonist told him not to get angry, since he was his favorite. Meanwhile, the butler informed the young master that he had a message for him. At that, the protagonist wanted to know what it was about. It was his friends who wanted to meet him in secret. The butler said it would be in the usual place, and with a cold look, the protagonist listened as the butler said he couldn't judge his friends just out of whim. Christian told the butler to confirm it, as he would go to the meeting. Now he thought things were going better than he had imagined. With some food on the table, drinks, and other accessories, Christian was received by his friends. However, the protagonist had a sulky expression as he listened to them comment on the rumors that he had changed. Meanwhile, he closely observed how those same friends could use such a young girl to serve their own interests. They were all content and wanted him to drink the wine they offered, insisting repeatedly. But as soon as Christian smelled the drink, he realized there was something strange mixed into it. Without hesitation, he threw the glass into one of the friends' faces. The blonde boy then asked what he was doing, at which point Christian explained that by looking at his face, he could tell something was wrong. With a specific hand gesture, he cast a spell over the servant girl's head. This gesture left the friends confused, as they believed he didn't know how to use dark magic. Then he stood up and said it wasn't the time for them to be surprised by his abilities. He grabbed the blonde friend by the hair, intending to extract some answers. The situation escalated to the point of causing a bit of chaos with the tables and so-called friends. Christian needed to get the truth out of them, even if it meant acting a bit harshly. He told them they knew exactly what they were doing to make him have to be so aggressive. Then he pulled a sharp object from his pocket and stated that if they didn't tell the truth, it would be better for them to stop calling themselves his friends. After a good amount of persuasion, the boys begged the young master to have mercy on them. They confessed that they had been ordered to use a drug to incriminate him after disposing of the girl. Christian then wanted to know who had given the order, but they tried to hide the information. That irritated the protagonist, who had to pressure them even more, asking if they wanted to lose something important. By pointing out a part of the body the boy could lose, they admitted that the one responsible was the butler. Then they promised to do anything to earn the young master's forgiveness. He said it was fine, that he would believe in them for now. He wanted the two to listen carefully to what he was going to say, so he revealed the plan for each of them to carry out at the right moment. He left them semi-unconscious, gagged and tied up, to prevent them from escaping. Meanwhile, the Count was in his office when the butler approached him in a panic. He said that the young master of the house had eliminated someone. With deep sorrow, he claimed it seemed the boy had gotten drunk and severely eliminated someone, throwing the body into the river. Still shocked, the father listened as the butler insisted they couldn't allow that behavior to continue. That was when the Lord ordered that Christian be brought before the demon court. With a harsh tone and a sorrowful expression, the Lord commanded that a trial be convened immediately. At this, the butler appeared visibly pleased, though he maintained a degree of composure. Everything had already been arranged for the hearing at the demon court to proceed. However, Christian declared himself innocent, stating before everyone that he had committed no crime. Still, witness statements were given claiming that he should stop insisting on the lie. Looking upward and seeing his friends, the young man stated before the court that there must have been a misunderstanding. It was then that the young woman, whom everyone believed had been eliminated, walked through the door alive. With that, the two friends who had helped fake everything were left in utter confusion. The girl gave her testimony, saying that the young master had taken her home after she woke up and had even helped with her rent. She then pointed to Christian's friends and said they were the real ones responsible for taking her. The girl also said that the two boys had forced her to put narcotics in the young master's drink. While still hearing her testimony, the protagonist used his magic to bring the two boys back to their senses. They had only been lightly hypnotized, so they wouldn't remember what had really happened. With that, the two confessed to being false witnesses and said they had been coerced into acting that way by the butler. Hearing that they were turning on him, Cox became desperate and tried to convince the count to believe his version. The butler looked at the young master and claimed that the situation had gone too far, pretending to be shocked. Given everything, the son asked the count, as the victim of the incident, to be allowed to speak. He then requested permission to act as an authority and interrogate the butler personally. His father, the count, was the one in charge of the investigation, so he hesitated for a moment. He then asked the butler to step up to the stage, as he would grant his son the right to prove his innocence. He said that if anything happened, the trial would be ended immediately, and the authority granted to his son revoked. With that, Christian declared that, as a representative of the great ruler of the magical empire and the majesty of the demon king, he wanted the butler to swear to tell the truth under penalty of elimination. Raising one hand and placing the other on his chest, the butler took the oath. As soon as he did, he felt the magic begin to take hold of him. It was clearly a binding spell. The butler could feel the effects gradually reacting within his body. Looking at his hands, he saw that the binding magic had already been completed. Everyone watching the trial could not have imagined that the young man was capable of using such magic. Christian had skillfully modified the spell so that even he could use it, though with certain conditions, like swearing twice. Now realizing he had fallen into a trap, the butler became reluctant and deeply enraged. Still, the protagonist continued to wield his authority and told the butler he had already sworn to tell the truth. With a firm gaze, he forced the butler to reveal why he wanted to tarnish his name. The butler then claimed he had received an order, speaking as if under compulsion. He said that a man, aware of the corruption, had threatened him and ordered him to ruin the young master's life. Christian asked if, by corruption, he meant the theft he had been committing for a long time. He then stepped even closer to the butler, demanding that he reveal who had given the order. He got so close that the magic became irresistible, preventing the butler from lying. Against his own will, he screamed that it was the succession candidate, young Master Ishid. He was referring to the second son of the Black Magic clan, young Master Eshid Debaram. After confessing, the butler tried to run, knowing that the family would eliminate him. Sensing his reaction, Christian rushed to grab a sword from one of the guards. With it, he delivered the punishment due to the butler for his crimes. He lost his head. Christian's father, witnessing everything, could barely believe his son had the maturity to take such action. At last, the protagonist looked at the count and said he was using the authority granted by him to punish that sinner. With that, the count wanted to know what the reason behind his son's actions truly was. The young man explained that if he had let the butler live, the main family would have fabricated false evidence and covered up the entire incident. Moreover, he wanted to make sure everyone present would remember the truth, that truth being that one of the succession candidates was trying to sabotage him from the shadows. With that, the count realized that his son was going beyond the immature behavior of the past. However, he knew that conversation couldn't continue in front of everyone, so he asked him to follow. Forming a magic portal, he took his son to another location, and the young man immediately wanted to know where they were. His father then explained that it was a secret training hall, as there were too many eyes and ears at court and not everything he wanted to say could be heard there. He explained to his son that the power of a family and its political influence were directly tied to the successor that they chose to support. He said that at the moment they were without a reliable option since the First Lord was considered a lunatic. The son took the opportunity to present his father with a new possibility. He clearly demonstrated his intent to become one of the succession candidates. The count thought it was a foolish notion, but the young man argued that even someone from a secondary family could be recognized as a legitimate successor. His father remarked that, although he had been more talented than Ishid in childhood, he had fallen behind due to bad habits. Even so, the son insisted that his father use his authority to recommend his name to participate in the dark ritual. The count warned that he would need to reach the second star level before being accepted, and he was still at the first. But with confidence in his eyes, the boy assured him that he would reach 2 stars soon, asking only that his father trust him. In the imperial capital, rumors said that the young master had changed greatly, and even the count himself was training him personally. Indeed, the count of that house had set aside time to train his son with his own hands, something he had never done before. Now Christian needed to master the muddy swordsmanship inherited from his father and integrate it with the black sight technique he had developed. The father was impressed, as the boy absorbed the techniques just taught at an incredible pace. Moreover, he asked questions that not even the Count could answer with certainty. The son also demonstrated that his personal methods were more effective than the traditional ones he was learning. In one session, he demonstrated on a humanoid mushroom how to apply the adapted technique. Adjusting posture details and infusing the blade with his dark energy, he was able to adapt it perfectly. The father was stunned to see the muddy swordsmanship he had just taught being used so efficiently. Christian explained that he had used the technique taught by him, only coated it with the energy of black-side swordsmanship. Those words deeply impressed the Count, who could hardly believe his son had grown so much in so little time. It hardly seemed possible that someone with just 1 star could perform such unbelievable feats. The boy also commented that, although everything seemed difficult, it was extremely easy for him. The Count was speechless, beginning to believe that his son might truly be a prodigy. Thus, 15 days passed since the direct training with the Count began. Christian felt exhausted and thought that running non-stop was hard, especially when everything had to be done with utmost precision. Lying on the training field's ground, he looked up until he saw someone approaching with a compassionate gaze. It was Merlin, who told him the duel wasn't far off. She confessed how eager she was for the promised day to arrive. It was clear he was giving it his all to meet her expectations, and his progress was remarkable. She made it clear that she would never kneel before someone with only 1 star, and Christian knew he had a lot to learn from her. Turning away, Merlin said he still had energy to spare, so he should keep training. As he watched her walk away, Christian knew that at present, Merlin was a 4-star mage. However, even within the same level, there were 3 distinct grades: lower, intermediate, and upper. Despite that, he was satisfied with his origins. He had been born into a wealthy family filled with experienced warriors. After training, he asked Maya if she had finished packing for the outing. The young demon girl was visibly excited and eager for what would be their first outing together. As he listened to her talk about how she had picked something impressive to wear, Christian interrupted her, saying she wouldn't be going. Maya replied that there was no need to worry, as she wouldn't get sunstroke. She knew how to take care of herself. At that moment, he remembered the time when he asked his father if he could replace his assistant with a human. The father replied that there was no way to break the master-servant contract he had made with Maya. At the time, the Count mentioned that perhaps, to break such a contract, something unusual would be needed, like a deep kiss. Back in the present, Christian had to deal with the demoness's persistence. He told her the place would be crowded and that her presence could cause trouble. Upon hearing that, Maya looked visibly saddened, as she had been eager for the outing and had spent decades trapped in that mansion. Her tears stirred a feeling of compassion in the protagonist's heart, so he decided to let her come, but insisted that she remain hidden from the other beings. Excited, she thanked him enthusiastically and said he really was the best. When she asked where they were going, Christian replied that it was a place where they could earn a lot of money. Maya didn't understand. After all, he was already very wealthy and had everything he needed. However, he explained that he needed far more than what he already had. He said he would use that money to invest in something he had never tried before. Inside the carriage, the younger brother waited impatiently, saying that he was late. As he approached the carriage, the protagonist noticed that his younger brother was already waiting. Thurn, arms crossed, warned that he had come along to keep an eye on him, in case his brother decided to cause trouble. The protagonist, with a provocative smile, replied that he was just going to have a little innocent fun. As he entered the carriage with his usual confidence, he remarked that demons should always keep alcohol and gambling close by. Even so, Thurn decided to go with him, and clearly had no intention of changing his mind. Brushing off his brother's concern, the protagonist asked if he was tagging along because he wanted to take care of his dear big brother. While the two argued inside the carriage, the vehicle was already on its way to the gambling den. When they reached a certain part of the city, the older brother looked at the younger and said that this would be the game where he'd end his arrogance. He said all he needed was a good bait, and his younger brother was perfect for the role, with his naive and honest demeanor. The two got out of the carriage and headed straight to the casino. Thurn, who had never been in a place like that, was impressed by the lights, sounds, and commotion, unable to believe something like that existed. Noticing his brother's amazement, the protagonist handed him a tiger mask and told him to wear it so he'd look less like a country bumpkin. Right after, he turned to Maya and ordered her to stay out of everyone's sight. Gently pulling her by the arm, he asked her to crouch so he could whisper something in her ear. As he gave his instructions, the young demoness simply watched him closely, absorbing every word. When he finished, Maya confirmed she would do exactly as instructed, while Thurn watched the scene curiously. The two brothers then decided to enter the casino, drawing the attention of several gamblers and con artists scattered throughout the room. Even so, the protagonist maintained his confident posture, while the younger brother clearly came across as an easy target. Thurn looked around, trying to understand how that luxurious and chaotic gambling house operated. With every step he took, it became more obvious to the crooks in the room that he was an ideal mark. Aware of that, the protagonist asked his brother if he'd like to place a bet. He said that if he lost, he'd have to call him Big Brother for an entire month. But if he won, he'd demand to be addressed as Honorable Emperor King. He then handed his brother a pouch full of bronze, silver, and gold coins, telling him to enjoy himself. Thurn, still a little hesitant, said he wasn't scared, although his posture clearly said otherwise. Soon after, he displayed the kind of determination typical of beginners, declaring that he would definitely win. With that, the two split up, each going to their own table, and the dealers began acting as if the protagonist were a complete novice. They were letting him win on purpose so he could taste the thrill of victory, but Christian knew it was just a trick. Winning at the start was part of the setup. Once the gamblers earned his trust, they'd make him raise his bets and then take everything. It was a classic con artist tactic, but the protagonist had been alert to it from the beginning. Meanwhile, Thurn proved to be such perfect bait that none of the swindlers there could resist. To provoke him even more, Christian even asked his brother to go home, saying that place wasn't his scene. Thurn, annoyed, asked if Christian wasn't losing too. The older brother's situation was a bit different, and several gamblers had noticed the conversation between the two. The protagonist then realized that Thurn had already been marked as the most vulnerable target in the entire casino. Even with so many losses, Thurn insisted on getting more money to try to recover what he had wagered. Christian, on the other hand, was satisfied. He knew he had warned his brother, and now he saw his plan unfolding exactly as expected. The night went on, and little by little, the younger brother kept losing, looking more and more helpless in front of the swindlers. Each of them was making a bit of money off the new player, delighted by his naivety. Watching it all, the protagonist realized it was the right time to put his plan into action. As expected, Maya returned and informed her master that she had done everything exactly as he had asked. She said she had located the people he mentioned and executed all the orders with precision. Meanwhile, Christian kept losing, but Maya didn't even notice. She was glowing from being praised. Soon after, she led her master to the specified property, according to the instructions given earlier. As soon as he entered the place, everyone stopped to look at him. It was clear he wasn't a welcome visitor. Unintimidated, he removed his mask and asked if they didn't recognize him or had forgotten who he was. With just a few words, everyone understood they were in the presence of Christian, the young master of the Count's lands. He demanded they fetch the boss of the place immediately. Soon, a short, stocky man appeared, visibly suspicious. It was the head of the Grantel Mercantile Company, known as a shrewd and skilled merchant. The protagonist, knowing that this man was the true owner of the gambling house, demanded to speak with him privately. Upon learning that the masked boy was the younger brother of the house heir, the merchant grew nervous. Christian explained the situation coldly, saying that the young man was the future heir of the house and had been deceived. To add more impact, Maya cast a mild magical fright on the merchant, just to remind him who was in control. Terrified, the man apologized and said that if he had known the noble identity of his guests, he never would have acted that way. Christian then pointed to a luxurious room with large windows and declared that he would show no mercy. He demanded a high amount to forget the incident. The merchant, sweating, claimed he didn't have all that money. The protagonist then said he would settle for 200,000 rupees. Relieved, the merchant thanked him. It was exactly what he had on hand. However, Christian wanted more than just money. He also requested some combat equipment, paying prices he considered fair. Maya, observing everything, thought her master was incredible, always with well-thought-out and effective plans. Still, she didn't understand why he insisted on including an old rusty sword in the deal. That sword was Gruna, a sacred blade that the former hero had obtained by offering his soul to a demon. Even after falling into corruption, the hero continued to use it. It was a weapon coveted by many demons. However, at the moment, the sword was rusted and unusable, as Maya rightfully pointed out. To calm her, Christian gave her a necklace she had been eyeing for a long time. The young demon girl received the gift with emotion. In her entire life, and even after death, she had never received something like that. He explained that he bought the necklace because he noticed how interested she was in that object. Maya was happy, as it was the first time she had received a personal gift from her young master. He asked her to hurry, as he wanted to return home quickly. Maya, euphoric, said that at that moment she would obey any request he made. As thanks, she promised to prepare a special strawberry juice, extracted from humans, even more delicious than usual. As they left, Christian had the feeling he was forgetting something important, but couldn't recall what it was. And meanwhile, his younger brother was still at the casino, practically out of money to bet. After Christian got home, all he wanted was to lie in bed and take a nap. But his younger brother grabbed him and said he couldn't have just abandoned him and walked off. He said he was almost sold off, and that if it weren't for someone who knew Christian, it would have been much worse. However, the protagonist reminded his brother that he had to keep his promise, since he had lost and now had to call him a certain way. The proper way to address his older brother now was as respected king, emperor, majesty, or big bro. Thurn didn't look at all comfortable with how he was supposed to refer to his brother. Even so, he tried to say it because that was the consequence of a bet he had lost. Against his will, he said the words his brother wanted to hear, though with clear reluctance. Hearing that, the protagonist was quite pleased and said that from that moment on, he should always be treated with respect. Even though he had said the right words, Thurn knew that sooner or later, his brother would regret it. As his brother walked away, Christian could hardly believe that the sweet little boy would become his enemy. He thought all of it might be the influence of Ashid, the son of Lancham, interim patriarch of the Dark Clan. The protagonist believed he didn't feel anything in particular. After all, he himself wasn't the real Christian. Even so, he figured it was best to stay alert, since he wanted to become the next heir, and for that, he would need Merlin. With that thought fixed in his mind, he looked at the sword he had received as a bonus and observed it in a special way. He was willing to train with that sword in a way to respect it, and finally unlock its power. He knew that Gruna wasn't an ordinary sword, since many mages had already tried to master it. It remained lost, treated as a mere gift, because all who had attempted to tame it had failed. Now it was his turn, and he wanted to see how the sword would react to his energy right from the start. As soon as he touched it, he felt a reaction in his hands, but realized that everything still seemed within normal limits. It had been forged to channel the sacred power of light, so it made sense that it would react against dark magic. In the end, it was just a weapon, and if he could analyze and break the patterns that rejected him, it might work. Driven by sheer will, with a simple hammer in hand, he was determined to master it at all costs. He kept striking the sword with that odd hammer again and again, trying to make it submit. He had been at it for quite some time, but neither side seemed willing to give in. He asked the sword if it could feel any difference and warned that he had other weapons at his disposal. Christian could keep at it for hours, and that's exactly what he did, without any hesitation. Smiling, he figured the sword had better be ready, because he would continue until the next day if necessary. Gruna already seemed exhausted and showed signs that it was finally about to yield to its new wielder. After a few days in a secret training field, Christian finally reunited with his father, his aunt, and his brother. The protagonist analyzed the figure in front of him, and by the silhouette, realized he had seen her before. He bowed respectfully and greeted the commander of the Black Shadow Knights. The Dark Woman looked at the boy and said that indeed, it had been a long time since she'd seen her nephew. That remarkable lady was the daughter of the leader of the Dark Magic Clan, and the blood sister of Christian's father and of Marcus Lancham. It was known that this woman was one of the greatest powerhouses within the Dark Magic Clan. He didn't understand why someone so powerful was there, until this father explained that the lady had come because of the incident with the butler. The protagonist wondered if the clan leader merely wanted to protect Ashid, because if that were the case, it would put him in trouble. After asking his aunt if that was the reason, she replied that the leader didn't care about petty internal feuds. She clearly stated that his interest was directed entirely at Christian, which made him uneasy. She commented that she wasn't sure if the boy was brave or just crazy, since he hadn't even reached the 2-star level. Even so, he already wanted to challenge Merlin, which she said was far too reckless and grounds for immediate retreat. The protagonist thanked his aunt for the concern, but assured her that he already had a plan and held his new sword firmly. The woman recognized Runa in his hands and thought the kid had truly gone insane. She knew he was reckless, but never imagined he could go that far. She told her brother that, although she thought Christian had finally come to his senses, now she was convinced he was delusional. The boy overheard and asked his aunt if there was any rule forbidding him from using a sword. Calmly, the woman explained that the sword in his hands was one that not even the clan leader had managed to control. He chuckled at that, removed the wrappings from the blade, and proudly displayed it. His goal was to show just how tamed Gruna was under his will. He approached his aunt with the sword in hand without hesitation. The woman thought the weapon might be a fake, so Christian threw it toward her so she could catch it. When the sword's magic touched her hands, she felt an intense pain. She dropped the weapon immediately, letting it fall to the ground, and demanded to know how he had pulled that off. The protagonist picked up his sword and said it was just a professional secret, so he couldn't reveal it. With the sword resting on his shoulders, he smiled and stated that one thing was certain: he was a genius. That's why he could wield a sword that not even the clan leader had managed to tame. That victory made his father extremely proud, as he could see that his son was growing more and more each day. As they talked and laughed, a voice remarked that it was good to see the young master enjoying himself. Stepping out of a portal, Merlin said that taming the sacred sword was truly impressive, but she still believed it wasn't enough to defeat her, as she was eager for that confrontation. She was certain that would be the last day he bragged so much about any achievement. Hearing Merlin's words, Christian simply observed her, knowing the moment of truth was quickly approaching. After saying those words, Merlin couldn't hold back and rushed toward the young master. She unleashed a mid-range power attack, but Christian seemed ready to defend himself with his new sword. He knew that, as expected, without restrictions, their power and speed were on completely different levels. He also understood that he would never be able to keep up with that gap, so his strategies had to work. Once again, he had to block the sudden, continuous attacks that Merlin launched at him. Everything there looked like a light show. Their power was intense, but Merlin was clearly stronger. The Dark Woman watched from a distance, aware that the sacred sword's power dissipated demonic energy. She knew that, at that level, Christian had already surpassed his older sister since childhood. Meanwhile, the woman kept closely watching the battle between Merlin and the talented Christian. She also noticed that with every move, he adjusted his energy to maintain control over the sword. At that point in the fight, Merlin already felt that it had truly been worth waiting a month. Meanwhile, the brother commended to the amazing woman that the impacts were strong, but the demonic energy seemed unstable. However, his sister had already calculated everything, realizing the young ones were adjusting their energy constantly to avoid rejection. They were both analyzing every detail of that fight between Christian and Merlin. At one point, Christian himself asked Merlin if she was enjoying the fight, and she asked how he kept predicting her moves. He explained that he had a very sharp vision and knew exactly what type of movement to make in swordsmanship. He said that every fencing technique has a base stance, and for an efficient strike, you need to raise your arm. That meant the shoulder and arm muscles would move, and that pattern applied to both masters and beginners. She found it interesting and asked if he would be able to block an even more powerful move. As she launched the attack, she reminded him not to forget that the Swamp Knights were the best swordsmen. Then, a great golden light intensified on the battlefield. Christian believed he had narrowly escaped. He had almost failed to react in time. Smiling, he raised his arms and thanked the purification artifact. It was thanks to his father that he was able to save himself. His father, watching it, thought that artifact should have been stored in his personal vault. He quickly realized his son was very skilled at sneaking items. He knew that during battle, using items could also be considered part of one's skill set. Determined to continue with his strategy, Christian threw another artifact at Merlin. When it exploded in the air, Merlin tried to shield herself using her sword. He warned her that it wouldn't help to try escaping, then threw another artifact, this time, a red orb. Merlin widened her eyes as she tried to flee, but the explosion was nearly unavoidable. After launching that sphere, Christian simply watched the result closely. He knew that artifact had been bought with the money stolen from Grendel, and he was pleased with its effectiveness. He looked at the flames and said that Merlin was still alive, urging her to get out quickly. He claimed the fight wasn't over, as he could still see the swift movements she was capable of. Pointing his sword at the flames, he prepared for the next strike, alert to any signal. Even in the fire, it seemed like he managed to shatter something just by touching it with his sword. Shortly after, something broke, and Christian began to show satisfaction with what he had achieved. His father was proud, as he now understood why his son had thrown that corrosive sphere into the air. Meanwhile, Merlin emerged from the flames, telling the young master she wouldn't hold back anymore. Her lips formed a smile that also hinted at the beginning of a dangerous madness. She was no longer restraining herself. She was thoroughly enjoying that intense battle. At the same time, Christian's sister noticed that Merlin had completely lost control of her emotions. The protagonist then had to act quickly and precisely to protect himself. Dodging slightly with his body, he slapped Merlin's wrist to dissipate her energy. It was a fabulous move, one that not even Merlin had foreseen, surprising her with Christian's precision. In an instant, he dodged the attack, grabbed his sword, and positioned it at his opponent's neck. Staring directly at the woman, he said it looked like he had won, showing satisfaction with the outcome. Right after, he lightly scratched her face and asked if she had enjoyed the fight, if it had been satisfying. Meanwhile, the aunt could hardly believe her nephew had defeated Merlin, while the father celebrated quietly. Merlin was completely satisfied. She laughed out loud, feeling her body shiver with the intense energy of the duel. The young man then looked at her and asked about the proposal she had made, expecting a direct answer. She looked at him curiously and said that if she stayed by his side, she would have battles like that in the future. Christian helped Merlin to her feet, promising that she would have as many battles as she wanted, without limitations. After the fight, that woman remained quietly gazing out a window, immersed in her thoughts. She thought that controlling demonic energy in that way was, at the very least, something only a true genius could do. She also remembered how the sword had rejected her own energy the moment she touched it. She knew not even the head of the family had succeeded, though she had heard her father say that twins might have a chance. Constantly adjusting energy to a frequency undetectable by the sword was rare and difficult. It would only be possible for a demon of pure blood, a demonic dragon, or perhaps a natural-born madman, someone who manipulated demonic energy as effortlessly as breathing. Now the woman heard her nephew ask if he was an elite candidate worthy of praise. In the kitchen of that enormous mansion, all the demons seemed to be properly performing their respective duties. Even the head chef, a large demon specialized in and passionate about the culinary arts, worked with absolute dedication. He carefully imported his strawberries and decorated a beautiful tart with his own skilled hand. Meanwhile, the young master watched from a distance, unable to believe that the strawberry cake he loved so much was made by him. The demon was immensely pleased to see the young master in the kitchen and asked how he could help. However, the protagonist revealed that he wanted to use the kitchen to bake cookies, as he wanted to give them to someone. Maya, upon hearing this, panicked, imagining that the young master intended to give them to another woman. Even so, the chef politely asked the young master to leave the cookies to him, promising he would take care of everything. However, the protagonist insisted that he was capable of making them himself, and besides, it was important that he did it personally. Soon after, a liquid splashed onto his face, causing him to glance over at two furious demons stirring a pot. After that little mishap, he left the kitchen and went looking for his aunt, who was with his father. The woman asked Christian what had happened for him to suddenly show up and greet them. He replied that he heard she was about to leave, so he came to say goodbye, and she suggested he rest, as he must have been exhausted. Christian asked her not to worry, as he had something special he wanted to give her before she left. As she untied the ribbon on the box, she saw that it was cookies and, slightly blushing, said she didn't need such a gift. The young man smiled and said he had made the cookies with his own hands, which made his father recall when he had asked about the aunt's favorite things. He quickly realized it had been so he could prepare something special himself, while the woman looked curiously at the box. The nephew asked her to at least try one, as he was eager to hear her opinion. Even skeptical about the quality of the cookies, she decided to taste one, since their appearance was simply irresistible. However, as soon as she took a bite, she realized it wasn't just the appearance that was good. The taste was unbelievable. With her face slightly flushed, She said the cookies were delicious, and the young man was overjoyed to hear it. She commented that since she had received such a tasty gift, she would like to repay the gesture somehow, which pleased Christian. The young man then took the opportunity to say that, if possible, he would like her to truly become his aunt from that moment on. The woman replied that since they were already related by blood, he wasn't exactly asking just to call her aunt. She understood what it meant. She knew he wanted her by his side in the struggle for succession. She then stated, with regret, that she couldn't grant that request. She said that, as he already knew, the family elders needed to remain impartial toward the potential successors. Even so, the young man insisted that he was only asking from the heart. He just wanted her to draw closer to him as a person. The woman found the request somewhat manipulative and was certain he had other intentions behind his words. But Christian said that, if by any chance she decided to side with her beloved nephew, he wouldn't be able to refuse. Young Christian wasted no time making faces like an innocent angel. Still eating the cookies, she said that his sincerity wasn't as irritating as it seemed. She remarked that, being her nephew and having given her cookies, it was only natural that she cared for him. She then asked if she could try more of those cookies, while the father watched everything with silent pride. The young man seized the moment to make his final move and declared that, if he felt hurt or resentful, the cookies wouldn't taste the same. At that moment, the woman realized she had been subtly tricked by that cunning young man, so she asked if he would consider joining the Dark Order. She commented that, in the duel against Merlin, he had shown himself to be a genius by executing truly impressive skills. She said that maybe he did have a talent capable of surpassing even the Dark Lord himself, but his rivals were tough. She feared he would fall before even reaching his full potential. The young man assured her that, if he couldn't overcome even those obstacles, then it wouldn't matter whether he lived or died. Showing determination, he thanked his aunt for her concern, but said he didn't believe in thinking about defeat. She looked at him and realized the boy had absurd confidence. She knew Christian had an uncommon resolve in choosing to follow a path filled with blood and challenges. However, as she mounted her horse, she decided to give him a word of advice just in case. She asked him to be cautious around the first young lady. That was when the Count asked if his sister was talking about Yulian, since he believed she was the most peaceful among the 5 princes. The woman replied that the boy would understand that in time, and he thanked her, saying he would keep the advice in mind. From atop her horse, she said they would see each other again soon. After his aunt left, Christian threw himself onto the soft bed in his room, lost in thought. He reflected on how incredibly strong both his father and aunt were. They had both reached level 6. Still, he had heard very few concrete reports about their feats during the Great War, which made him wonder. He thought there must be even more powerful warriors out there, possibly capable of crushing the army of light completely. Lying down with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, he refused to let history repeat itself, and knew that, in 1 month, he needed to become stronger. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a month had gone by, and he once again stood before his father. The Count had something important to report to his son, which was why he summoned him to that private place. However, as soon as he noticed his son's presence, he felt that something had changed profoundly. Staring intently at Christian, he asked if he had finally reached level 2, because he looked completely different. Seeing his son reach the 2-star level truly impressed the Duke, although Christian said there was no need for such astonishment, since he had already promised it would happen. Even so, he wanted to know what subject his father wished to discuss for calling him at that hour. Without delay, the father explained that he had received a message from the main family. It stated that he had submitted Christian and Thren as candidates for the sacred dark rite. However, when the response arrived, they had accepted only the younger son and rejected Christian. They claimed to have justifiable reasons, such as frivolous spending, a reputation for womanizing, excessive alcohol consumption, and even petty theft. Additionally, they accused him of property damage and frequent involvement in fights. Even knowing all of that was true, the father was furious, feeling that the disdain they showed toward his son was offensive. Christian asked if the decision had come from the Viscount, but the father assured him it hadn't. He stated that it was the doing of Loin de Barning, a direct member of the main family's bloodline. Both of them shared the opinion that Loin was dangerous, influential, and on the rise within the sacred dark rite. In that ritual, candidates consumed pure darkness to reach new levels of power. Since the amount of darkness was limited, candidates had to fight each other in semi-lethal battles to determine the hierarchy. If Loin was the favorite, he could monopolize the darkness and thus become the 6th young lord. Christian's father tried to calm him, saying he would try another nomination, but the son rejected the idea. Christian stated he preferred to handle it with his own hands, even if his father thought he had changed too much. He believed that certain matters should be left for adults to resolve, but not this one. Chris already had a certain affection and respect for the man who was now his father, despite their past distance. Still, he thanked him for the gesture and said he had his own methods for achieving his goals. At that moment, the father suspected that those methods were questionable, but asked if he already had a plan. That's when Christian asked if the sons of the house of Count Tyreman were among the collateral families of the bloodline. Upon hearing that family name, the Count immediately became furious, but the son asked him to calm down. He said it would be enough to prove his worth, as the Tyreman family would soon be hosting the hunt for the Dark Pill, and he would join as a shepherd. Meanwhile, in the domain of the clan leader, a woman stated that she had personally evaluated young Christian. Upon hearing that, the patriarch wanted to know what the boy was like, and she replied that he was incomparable to the others. Even so, the leader found it hard to believe. He remembered an arrogant boy who thought he was a genius, when in fact he was just a fake prodigy. The woman then stated that he had completely changed and was now someone very different from the past. That sparked the leader's interest, who asked his daughter if she believed the young man could fulfill his long-awaited wish. She knew her father was still alive only because of that old and important desire, having refused death several times. Wisely, she replied that if he wasn't capable yet, then he was very close to becoming so. Of course, the patriarch didn't intend to intervene or take a position directly in a matter considered so trivial. But according to the woman, the young man was a true ferocious beast, though still just a child. Observing his daughter's stance in defense of her nephew, the patriarch noticed that she was already beginning to align with the boy. She lowered her head, reflecting on how her father had always been strict with those in whom he had great expectations. While she thought, she heard her father say that if she was willing to go that far, she had probably grown fond of the boy. As soon as he was summoned, the chief butler and vampire appeared before his lord. The red-haired, violet-eyed vampire was Simon, the chief butler of the Dark Magic clan. Simon confirmed with his master whether he was to only observe young Master Christian. After receiving confirmation, he said he fully understood and would act according to the orders given. Before leaving, he asked if he could play a small prank during the surveillance, which worried Christian's aunt. The Lord authorized it, but asked that Simon not go too far. However, judging by the vampire's appearance and reputation, it was clear he neither knew nor respected limits. Even though she was concerned, the woman said nothing. She simply watched silently as the butler departed. Deep down, she sincerely hoped her nephew would be able to overcome all the challenges safely. Elsewhere, a carriage crossed a beautiful landscape, heading toward its final destination. Inside the carriage, the protagonist reflected on having quickly reached the 2-star level, thanks to his natural talent. He knew he needed a dark pill to accumulate a large amount of energy in a short period. The problem was that capturing the demonic beast carriage off didn't automatically guarantee the right to a dark pill. As soon as the carriage stopped, the owner of the betting house ran to meet the young master. The moment he saw him, Christian asked if the man had come empty-handed. The man hurriedly showed a sack of coins and said that of course he had brought a gift. Before he could even finish speaking, Christian threw the sack of gold coins on the ground with disdain. Grandel didn't understand the reason for the rejection, but the young master clearly didn't like the gift. He knew that man was involved in illegal activities, and that could become a problem if others found out. He mentioned the tax evasion at the casino, leaving Grandel visibly cornered and eager to please him in any way. Placing a hand on his friend's shoulder, the young master said he urgently needed an ash pill. The news left Grandel worried, as the pill's value had recently increased considerably in the market. He said a bigger incentive would be necessary, so Christian asked Miss Maya to assist him. She, showing off her skills, said she would work wonders with those little toys in her hands. The man, seeing that crazed demoness, didn't even want to consider going through that kind of experience. He quickly said he would search for everything the young master desired without delay. Already inside the carriage, the young master also requested an extremely sharp dagger, surprising Grandel with the unusual request. After making all his requests, Christian continued on his journey inside the carriage. Grandel, watching the carriage pull away, felt completely powerless in the face of the situation. As the carriage followed its course, Maya wanted to know what the young master planned to do next. He told the coachman they would make a stop as he wished to visit a certain place. Upon arriving at the elixir shop's door, he was warmly welcomed by the attendants. As soon as he entered, he pointed to the shelf and requested a specific portion of a special elixir. While the owner placed the elixir on the table, Maya showed curiosity and wanted to understand his choice better. She knew that elixir was a powerful stimulant, strong enough to raise even an elephant's trunk. As much as Maya thought about it, she couldn't imagine any purpose for such a potent aphrodisiac. Raising her hand to her mouth, she asked the young master if he truly had that kind of intention. Visibly embarrassed and annoyed, he replied that it wasn't like that at all. With no other option, he explained that it wasn't for him and that he didn't need that kind of thing. From that, she concluded the aphrodisiac was for the count. While the shopkeeper remained stunned, Christian explained that his father was getting older and maybe needed a little stimulation. Then, looking seriously at the shopkeeper, he demanded that, for the count's honor, it be kept absolutely secret. The shop owner, terrified, solemnly swore that as long as he lived, no one would ever hear about that request. After settling the matter, the protagonist met with his father and brother. Pointing at Thurn, he demanded that he address him by his full title. Grumbling, the younger brother obeyed. Soon after, the topic shifted to the hunts for the ebony beast. Christian warned Thurn that they were dangerous and told him to be careful. The Duke, seeing his sons bickering, told him to stop fighting and just go finish off those beasts. Christian promised to return with great and glorious news. After that, the father turned to Thurn and wanted to know why he had called him Emperor King. Some time later, already within the Tyreman family's territory, The butler informed them that young Master Christian would not be allowed in. The coachman, outraged, found it absurd that his lord was being denied entry to such a place. The butler explained that the order came from young Lord Alros, who had made his dislike for Christian quite clear. Faced with that, the protagonist asked if that meant he had to find lodging in the capital on his own. Very embarrassed and sweating nervously, the demon confirmed that yes, he would. Once again, the coachman protested furiously and even threatened the butler, trying to defend Christian's honor. But the protagonist was more interested in profiting from the situation and asked who would pay for his accommodations. When he heard the answer he was expecting, he was completely satisfied. Being informed that the Lord himself would cover the costs, he immediately went looking for the biggest and most luxurious hotel in the capital. He wanted the best room possible, since he wouldn't be paying a dime for it. Worried, the butler asked how much it would all cost, and the answer was no less than 100,000 rupees. Looking at the luggage, Christian ordered them to unpack everything within the hour, because afterward they'd go drink to celebrate. Inside one of the suitcases was a demoness, who emerged intending to surprise her young master. As soon as she appeared, she noticed the room was spacious, perfect for her to serve him with devotion. Shocked, Christian asked when exactly she had hidden herself in the luggage. She replied that she had done it only to serve him, thinking he missed her presence too much. From the look on his face, it seemed like he couldn't wait anymore, so she had decided to grant him that honor. Meanwhile, Lord Alros held in his hands the astronomical bill caused by the arrival of the unexpected guest. Christian, observing the third son of the Tyreman family, commented that he was a star and shouldn't complain so much. He stated that, considering what he did to the abusive doorman, the cost was actually quite cheap. That attitude from Christian made Alros furious, to the point of crumpling the bill in his hand. Overcome by rage, he released his beastly magic and asked if Christian was looking to visit the next world. However, by doing so, he revealed exactly what Christian wanted to see: Tyraman Bloodline's famous beast-controlling magic. The protagonist realized it was very different from the taming techniques used by the Alliance. It was a form of dark magic that completely subdued creatures, nullifying their will. Enchantments of confusion, dread, and ecstasy intertwined to dull the beast's instincts. However, the system was more complex than he expected. It wasn't something one could master in a short time. He commented to Maya that if they were going to face that big scary cat, they might need proper weapons. With that, she handed him a long staff. With the staff in hand, Christian told his rival that he could come at him with everything. The blonde youth refused to take orders from someone he considered so far beneath him as Christian. As soon as the command was given, the enormous beast charged and bit the staff with enough force to nearly snap it. Right after, it shook the staff violently and flung Christian along with it, now completely shattered. As he stood up, Christian commented that it wasn't half bad, but he thought it was cowardly to fight 2 against 1. He stated that, if he won, he wanted to enter the hunt not just as a monster handler, but also as a bodyguard. Those words left the spoiled young man intrigued, thinking Christian was extremely arrogant. He then declared that he would bring him to his knees, begging for mercy. With a command, he ordered his beast to finish the rival off for good. However, as soon as it received the command, the beast hesitated, its paws cracking the ground as it tried to stop. It felt afraid, as if it had seen something terrifying. Alros couldn't understand where his opponent had gone, but Christian was already behind him. Firmly gripping his staff, he struck the young rival from behind, who barely saw the attack. Wasting no time, Christian began striking repeatedly with the staff, intent on teaching his enemy a lesson. He then asked if it hurt and told him to suck it up, because there was plenty more where that came from. He added that even if the little brat cried, he wouldn't go easy on him. Firmly holding the beast's reins, he told the rival to shut up, saying he found his words disgusting. That creature no longer saw Christian as just an ordinary boy, but as the very embodiment of death. Because of that, it hesitated to obey and refused to follow its former master's commands. Alros couldn't understand how his once ferocious beast was now trembling in fear in a corner. That's when he realized Christian had actually touched the creature. With an excited expression, the protagonist revealed that he had only used a 2-star illusion spell. Now he would take over the fight himself, creating a magic circle beneath his own feet. With that, he summoned a new creature, a grotesque horse that looked like a cross between a dog and a nightmare. With his club resting on his shoulders, Christian asked the rival if he knew what happened to spoiled little punks. Then he launched a single strike directly at the head of the pampered boy. With no time to react, the rival fell flat on his back, nearly unconscious. Christian explained that the secret was not to wait for the transformation or give time for spellcasting. The trick was to beat them down before any of that happened. Now that its master was down, the summoned creature lost all reason to exist. Continuing his act as an unhinged youth, the protagonist was caught up in a game. He insisted the staff play with him, saying it was just a break, something they could do during their free time. Meanwhile, he asked Maya for a drink, which she served him with great enthusiasm. So she brought him a ginger drink, something he absolutely hated. All the while, he was constantly judged by the subordinate demons watching him. He knew exactly why the lord of that house had ordered someone to watch that boy. He definitely seemed like a lost cause. Aware of that, the protagonist invited them to join in the next round. He said that, in any case, their master had taken a serious beating and wouldn't be getting up until the next day. He also mentioned that if they played, he would keep everything that happened in the mansion that day a secret. They played all day, until a bit of light began to shine through the window. But it was already late at night, and they realized that Christian was still playing. Just like the demon playing with him, he also fell asleep at the table. Watching the scene, the others figured everyone was drunk after so many rounds. However, as soon as he noticed they turned their backs, Christian opened his eyes and kept watching. Now he could stop pretending, as the watchers had left, thinking he'd be passed out all night. To make sure they had really gone, he peeked through the window. After handing a blanket to Maya, he thought to himself that it was late and time to act. He told her he needed to step out for a moment and asked her not to follow him. Even though she didn't like the idea, Maya would obey and wait for her master. The only thing she wanted to know was whether he was taking in that backpack, the aphrodisiac he had bought earlier. Now she realized the aphrodisiac wasn't for the Count, but for him, which saddened her as she couldn't serve him herself. Even so, she hoped he would have a successful night of fun, while he thought she really had no limits. After walking a bit, he had already reached the Kaitan mountain range. That was the region of the Count's hideout, and as the rumors said, the aura of magical beasts there was truly incredible. Observing the vegetation, he knew the hunting grounds must be close. That's when he spotted 2 guards on watch in a secluded area. He noticed that only 2 guards, both quite careless, were making rounds. He had learned the invisibility spell from Maya, so he would be able to pass unnoticed. He remembered when he asked her about the spell and how she suspected he wanted to spy on girls. But at that moment, the spell was working perfectly and was extremely useful. He managed to sneak past the guards without even being noticed. He approached the altar, the endpoint where the ebony hunt would conclude. As he touched the ground, he sensed a dark atmosphere. The problem was the method of obtaining the ebony. He knew the beast, Karamazov, had to offer itself willingly. The creature itself needed to be pushed to such extreme fear that it would prefer death. In that way, like opposites meeting, intense fear and absolute ecstasy would be separated by only a thin line. In that instant, even a mere fragment could transform into authentic ebony. Now the protagonist understood why the Count controlled beasts through fear. With that, he remembered the previous beast and began planning to steal that house's secret technique. But he realized he could mix other substances and use the aphrodisiac to send the beast into a frenzy. Since he didn't have enough time to learn the secret technique, he needed to find another method. While thinking about it, he felt a strong presence and turned quickly. As he turned, he saw nothing, but he knew that someone, or something, was watching him from hiding. However, the protagonist was no novice in that world and could easily distinguish magical energies. So he began walking toward the direction where he felt the strongest magical presence. He walked until he reached the entrance of a deep cave and realized the place was dangerous. He didn't hesitate for a second and entered the cave, even sensing the heady concentration of energy. There was a powerful evil presence there. On top of that, a high-level dark barrier spell was active. Now he had doubts about that place. He thought it might be a Jima rift. Jima was the world of demons and demonic creatures, and a rift connecting Jima to the human world was right before him. The protagonist could hardly believe he had found something so phenomenal without even searching. And then he had an idea. He could lure the beast to that place, and on top of that, had the perfect ingredients for it. Since he had the aphrodisiac in hand, he thought everything was falling perfectly into place and grew eager for the hunt to begin. While he thought that, the Bat Butler continued to watch the young man, just as he had promised the Lord. After assuming a human form, he found it unbelievable that the young master could be such an intriguing person. He had taken down the arrogant one from the Tyreman house and also fooled the observers with his irresponsible attitude. He had infiltrated a forbidden place, all to carry out his own plans. It was so fascinating that the vampire felt an overwhelming urge to play a prank that led him to act on impulse and walk toward the rift, stepping through the magic circles. He cut his own hand and activated the magic cycle with his blood, placing it over the rift. As soon as the liquid touched the magic circle, the demon's summoning was complete. The rift, now awakened, asked what the traitor desired, and the vampire butler could barely contain his excitement. After all the preparations, another day had dawned. The big day had arrived, and that moment would be marked by the hunt for the beasts. Lord Lauren's team was already ready, with their banner in hand. To keep things in order, the protagonist asked the leader if he was feeling well. The rival saw the protagonist placing his hand on his sword and said he was acting arrogant for carrying that thing. The protagonist replied that the sword worked better than a club, and he could test it if he wanted. Tauren said to let it go. The hunter should begin the chase and lead the beast to the altar. While the bat watched everything, thinking he hadn't been seen, the protagonist pretended not to notice him. When the young lord called the protagonist with a mocking tone, he responded. They were close to the altar and seemed to be plotting a way to make the hunt more efficient. A young man with canine ears and snout asked the protagonist to stand aside so as not to get in the way. Seeing that, even as he stepped away, the protagonist scoffed. He wanted to move forward but was blocked. Perched in a tree, the protagonist wondered how long they would last trying to do it on their own. He knew that in the end, everything would go according to plan. After all, he had brought the sacred silver and the dagger. A sound came from the foliage, drawing the attention of the two hunters in front of the protagonist. He knew that whatever it was coming, so he just stayed still, observing. The creature in question was a class 4 monster, quite beautiful, resembling a peacock. The protagonist set his eyes on it, thinking that the creature didn't look like much and had a somewhat knave appearance. The subordinate asked the young master if he was ready to begin the hunt, and he requested that the master start the sealing magic right away. Sensing it was the right moment, the young master of that house began activating his seal. The two subordinates, along with the lord, began to cast their sealing spells. With the sealing magic, at first it looked like the beast would bow down before the hunters. However, all of a sudden, its eyes began to change and its appearance shifted as well. What once looked like a gentle peacock now had terrifying eyes and rows of sharp teeth. Not even the young master of that house had imagined the creature could be so frightening. That's how he was caught off guard when the creature slapped him in the face with its paw. As he was launched into the air, his dog-eared subordinate ran to check if the young master was okay. Whatever was on the wings of that huge beast seemed to be poison, and even though everyone tried to put up a barrier to defend themselves, their young master didn't seem to be managing well. They were having a hard time, and the protagonist could tell. From a distance, he knew they wouldn't be able to hold him back, since he was completely out of his mind due to the aphrodisiac. The young hunter knew that, even though everyone had taken the antidote against the beast's poison, staying exposed for too long would be dangerous. The order was to hold the beast at all costs. However, the beast was completely disoriented, and its instincts now ruled above all else. The creature charged at the young master, and not even his subordinates could defend him. When he realized things were about to get serious, he shut one eye and raised his arm in front of his face. Something caught his attention. It was so surreal that he opened both eyes in that direction. His rival was saving his hide, saying that Count Tyreman's house was a failure and that it was a waste of time for a busy man like him to be helping. He then said that if the young man agreed to call them older brother, maybe he'd help. The young man tried to refuse, but the protagonist warned that they didn't have any more time to waste. Looking to the side, he saw that the subordinate was already being poisoned by the venom's strong presence. Grinding his teeth in frustration, he was ready to accept and call the protagonist Big Bro. With all that, Christian wanted him to keep his word after being saved, and so he struck the beast with his sword, making the creature submit to him temporarily. Then he used the sealing symbol in front of the young man, showing he could also use spells. And it wasn't just any magic, it was the sealing magic used by that family. The young man was intrigued, since he had only seen it once before in front of his rival. Or maybe the protagonist thought it was just lame of his rival to think only he could do such a thing. He even mocked it, saying that intermediate sealing magic wasn't that complicated. He continued holding that moving rope, covered in magic and thorns. And not just that, he managed to mount the wild beast and now dictated its fate. With swift steps, he rode the creature away from that place. The young lord of that region tried to warn the protagonist that he was heading in the direction of Gehenna, but the protagonist knew that very well, and so he just looked back briefly. In no time, the fierce beast entered the cave, and its behavior began to shift. Although it was already crazed, it seemed somewhat different as soon as it saw the red circle. The protagonist asked the beast if this was the first time it was feeling the true evil of Gehenna. He told the creature to feel a deep fear and enjoy every second of that emotion. That beast seemed to go into total ecstasy when faced with such horrifying fear. Within moments, its eyes turned golden, and it began to drool excessively. And as that was happening, the protagonist was ready to draw his silver dagger. After grabbing it, he plunged the dagger, causing a fatal wound to the creature. As he made that extremely calculated move, the others managed to catch up to him. The young lord of those lands warned that this was the most dangerous cave and they should leave. Meanwhile, the protagonist pretended to be retrieving something from within the fallen creature and said the young lord was too cowardly. Then he pulled the sphere out of the beast and handed it to his rival, saying it was a sacred orb. With the orb in hand and offering it to the rival, the young man noticed it wasn't ebony, but rather sacred silver. That left the young man quite disappointed, as it wasn't what he had been expecting. A close friend of that young master said it was all that bastard's fault for interfering. Even so, the rival was grateful for what the protagonist had done by saving his vassals. He was also happy because, thanks to the protagonist, they had made it through without any serious casualties. Christian listened silently, knowing he was the main culprit, and had also traded the ebony for the silver. He thought that since he had already started, he might as well go all the way, so he pointed at the spoiled brat and demanded he keep his word. From that moment on, he should call him Big Brother just as they had agreed, and he shouldn't break the promise. While the two were stuck in that standoff, a powerful pressure was felt by everyone. The young master's vassals were all on the ground. The pressure was so great that they couldn't withstand it. The blonde youth stared in confusion, unable to understand what was happening, while the protagonist knew exactly what was about to occur. That was the presence of a true demon, the most relentless kind, and Christian could hardly believe his own eyes. Meanwhile, that monster was calling the humans little toys and saying it had been centuries since it had seen so many. The blonde youth stepped in front and told Christian to run. Since he was an outsider, maybe the monster wouldn't target him. But the protagonist wasn't interested in running. He knew very well that this was all the bat's doing. Christian realized he would have to deal with that winged spy, and so he drew his dagger. With incredible aim, he threw a strike at the spying bat and hit it. The dagger struck the center of that small red creature, shattering it into fragments. With that, Simon's privileged view was momentarily neutralized. The vampire butler didn't know when the young man had noticed his presence. Now that his familiar was destroyed, teleportation would be difficult. He would have to fly, which would take several minutes. He thought that if he arrived too late, there would be nothing left, not even the young master. With that in mind, the bat flew as fast as it could, hoping to make it in time before something worse happened. Once the bat disappeared, only the bloody dagger fell to the ground. The protagonist declared that he didn't like being watched by anyone. The demon thought the boy was stressing too much for someone whose days were numbered. Christian knew, judging from the demons he had faced back when he was still Chris, that even if it was a low-ranked demon, this one had to be at least rank 5, but he wouldn't be afraid. To ensure he wouldn't be watched by anyone, he cast a spell on the 2 vassals of the blonde boy. The youth turned to look at the protagonist in confusion. They were supposed to be on the same side. The protagonist's first strategy was to knock all 3 down with his magic, but the blonde boy put up a fight, so he had to do it by hand. He had to locate him to make sure he wouldn't interfere with what was about to happen in the battle against the demon. Because of that, the demon misunderstood and thought the man was so desperate he was willing to sacrifice the others. So the demon became interested in receiving them as offerings and decided to spare his life. The protagonist said he had a rule: he didn't get involved with filth like that demon. The demon thought the line was overused but had to admit it was effective. Still, he believed that the sacred sword, which Christian hadn't even been able to wield, was just junk and couldn't help him. However, when the demon attacked, the protagonist managed to defend himself using that very sword which had been called junk. At first, the demon's blow was too strong for Christian to handle. From the look in his eyes, though, it seemed he had a plan to neutralize that demon. The demon, thinking he had already won, simply grabbed him by the arm. He looked at the young man and said that if he made the offering, he could go live out his pathetic little life in peace. But with a smile, the protagonist asked if he really thought only people like him could use the sacred sword. In one quick move, he managed to break free from the giant demon and jumped skillfully to the ground. Once on the ground, he accessed his golden energy core. From that moment on, he would no longer use demonic magic, with the power of light. When the demon saw he could access both energies, he was stunned. Christian, seeing the demon's reaction, asked if he was already starting to panic. The demon swore he would tear Christian's fragile body to pieces. After saying those words, he unleashed a red power, shining brightly toward the young man. At first, Christian had a lot of difficulty neutralizing it, but his power of light was immense. He used a power called Dead Sea Flash, a technique he had learned in his previous life. With that power, he was able to slice through the red energy the demon had unleashed. This caused total confusion in the evil creature. He couldn't understand how a demon could possess such a power. Whether he understood it or not, he was being controlled by Christian through his light magic power. However, he was extremely tired. It seemed his body was still not adapted to that level of strength. Meanwhile, the people he had put to sleep were still lying on the ground. But Christian's strength was so depleted that he ended up collapsing to the floor. His eyes showed the exhaustion and strain he had suffered after fighting the demon. Even so, memories came to his mind of when he had learned to use the Dead Sea Flash with an old comrade. The friend who taught him thought Chris was unbelievable. Just seeing something once, he could replicate it. He was supposed to make a single light slash that would cut across the Dead Sea. The friend knew that, even so, anyone using that technique with a sword wasn't worthy of the light of House Mayor. But he had great confidence that Chris could wield the light that would save the world. At that moment, while Christian was lying on the ground, something lightly touched his head. It was a demon's claw. The young man had caught the attention of one of the demons, who introduced herself as Mapina. Meanwhile, his body was still lying on the ground, but the others who had gone to search had found everyone. In his mind, the demon was speaking, saying she was the first seat of the 7 circles of Gehenna. She said she had been watching Christian's path with great interest. After being taken out of the cave, the protagonist was brought directly to the castle of the Tyreman family. He was surprised to learn that he had been unconscious for 2 whole days, and imagined he might have done something important during that lost time. Despite the frustration, at least his body was intact. His mind was already functioning again, as he immediately began searching for the ebony fragment. Rummaging through his things, he found everything carefully arranged on the bedside table, exactly as he had left it. That's when he remembered Mapina, the name of the demoness who had contacted him so unexpectedly. He knew that some demons, upon recognizing promising talents still young, offered blessings from the higher ranks of hell, but that didn't worry him. Even if she was from the 7th circle of Gehenna, she didn't seem that impressive. Just then, the door opened, revealing the lord of the land, visibly pleased to see that Christian had awakened. Beside Count Tyreman was his son, the blonde young man who had also survived the demonic assault. Both respectfully greeted him. The Count asked Christian to remain lying down, as he only wanted him to listen carefully to what he was about to say. He explained that the previous day, a detailed investigation revealed that the demon had been summoned and had not appeared of its own will. Even so, the danger was real, and the destructive potential that creature could have caused was unimaginable. Christian knew that if he told the truth and said he had defeated the demon alone, no one would believe him. The Count, showing humility, apologized for underestimating him, mentioning the moment he had ordered the butler to send him to lodge far away. Now he saw Christian as a true benefactor of House Tyreman, someone worthy of consideration and gratitude. The protagonist replied that he hadn't done anything special, only fulfilled his role as a member of the dark magic clan, since, in the end, they were all part of the same family. Those words left an impression on the Count, who lowered his head, reflecting for a few moments before smiling faintly. He said that if there was anything he could do to repay him, All the young man had to do was ask. Christian thought for a few seconds and revealed that he wanted to propose a reconciliation between houses Tyreman and Khazar. He commented that the two had been at odds for too long, and that it would be better to act as healthy rivals than as enemies poised for war. He believed that through fair competition, they could grow together, forming a strong bond worthy of the names their bloodlines carried. Naturally, he knew the origin of the conflict came from the main house, which manipulated everything from behind the scenes. The Count asked, surprised, if Christian was suggesting they rise against the central house. The young man calmly shook his head, explaining that they simply no longer needed to serve as pawns in a system that was already corrupted. Smiling serenely, the Count stated that he would contact Count Khazar to discuss the matter in person. Christian was pleased to hear the Count refer to his father as a close friend and show such respect for him. He thought that, when the era of destruction returned, those united houses could form a solid and prepared front line. In good spirits, the Count looked to his son and asked if he was just going to stand there watching or if he would finally hand over the gift to the guest. The blond young man, excited, handed over the silver orb he had found beside Christian when he was unconscious. He said he thought it might be something important, so he kept it to deliver in person. Christian, however, felt he deserved an even better gift for everything he had done. Count Tyreman, laughing at the boy's boldness, agreed that he truly deserved something more grand. So he gave Christian a summoning stone, capable of storing even a level 4 creature. It was an extremely rare item, almost impossible to obtain, and it came with another promise. The Count stated that he would send an official report to have Christian included in the next ritual of darkness. Faced with such generosity, Christian sincerely thanked him for both the gift and the recognition and support offered. Just as he was getting ready to leave the room, he heard the Count insist that he rest a bit more before any new adventure. After everyone left, Christian gave a slight smile, satisfied with how things had unfolded and with what was coming next. Turning his face, he calmly said that Simon could come out from where he was hiding. The red-haired vampire emerged from the shadows, surprised, since not even the Count had noticed his concealed presence. Christian looked straight at him and declared that it was a pleasure to meet him officially. Placing a hand on his chest, Simon introduced himself as the current head of the Dark Magic clan. But Christian knew there was more behind that name, as he recognized him as Noga's loyal confidant and something even more significant. Clenching his fists, he remembered that Simon was the leader of the Blood Shadow Troop, a group of ruthless assassins. That troop had committed massacres across the continent, attacking both the Magical Empire and the Light faction without distinction. The leader of that group, classified as an 8-star demon, had evolved by the end of the era into a 9-star. He was then recognized as the 10th Demon King, and that man was Simon himself, legitimate son of the Demon King. The revelation visibly shook Christian, as he only now realized who he had truly been dealing with. Simon, on the other hand, found the young man from House Khazar remarkable, praising his elegance and combatability. He said he knew Christian had defeated the cave demon alone, though Christian pretended not to know what he was talking about. The vampire said he visited the cave and found no trace of the monster, not even signs of reverse summoning. He was impressed with how clean the scene was, as if the demon had simply vanished. He asked Christian to explain how he did it, as he intended to report everything directly to Lord Noga. Christian refused, saying that not even with gentle persuasion would he share the secret. He said that a beast that hides its claws until the end is always more valued than one that shows off. Simon was amused by the young man's personality, but was caught off guard when the boy asked him to apologize. Confused, Simon listened as Christian firmly claimed that what happened was a cover-up. He raised his hand, explaining that he knew it was a summoning, as he himself had been the summoner. Simon began to sweat, becoming serious as he heard the direct accusation from the young man. Christian said that, narrowly, a demonic summoning incident had not led to the death of innocent nobles. Simon closed his eyes and said he would accept responsibility, but Christian replied that he would keep it secret. However, he made it clear that Simon now owed him, and it was a significant debt. Simon only widened his eyes slightly but chose to say nothing more in that moment. He asked if this was a deal, stepping back slowly, trying to grasp the young man's intentions. Christian said he could call it whatever he wanted, and Simon, smirking, agreed before disappearing into the shadows. Still lying on the bed, Christian heard the vampire's voice saying he would eagerly await his visit to the main mansion. He knew that Simon would play a central role in the coming era of destruction, and that meant it was essential to maintain a good connection with him. After that experience during the hunt, the young Messie's personal maid was diligently packing his bags. Everything was ready for them to depart, and just as he was about to leave, something unexpected happened. Altas decided to enter the protagonist's room before the departure, taking the liberty of stepping through the door unannounced. As soon as he walked in, he came face to face with the demon maid and Christian, who seemed to be in high spirits. However, the true reason for the visit was to warn Christian about something he thought was important. He said that, even if Christian might already know, it was worth emphasizing for his own good. Altas revealed that the one opposing his participation in the sacred ebony ritual was Lord Roin. He mentioned that, although they were in the same rank, Rowan had access to much higher quality elixirs. He stressed that, to most people, Christian was nothing more than easy prey to be eliminated. But Christian didn't see things that way and declared that he wouldn't allow black magic to be monopolized so easily. Altos insisted that he meant no harm. He only asked that Christian refrain from participating in the ritual this time. He truly seemed to be speaking out of concern, although Christian didn't seem to take it seriously. The blonde youth grew irritated, feeling slighted after going through the trouble of coming to warn him in person. He thought Christian was just an arrogant brat. While Christian asked Maya to get ready, calmly Christian placed a hand on Altos' shoulder and asked him to think things through before doing something he'd regret. Back at Count Kaiser's residence, Christian's younger brother was clearly upset. He was eager to train with his brother, but as soon as Christian arrived, all he did was head straight to the training room. Still, the younger brother ran to him, calling him Honorable Big Bro with shining eyes. He reminded him of the promise, saying they had agreed to duel as soon as they got back. Christian looked at the boy and noticed how much he had grown, already reaching mid-rank 2. He knew his brother would also be participating in the ritual of the sacred ebony, which could become a problem. So he told him they should wait until he finished his training, and only then could they duel. The younger brother replied that this time the duel would be completely different and asked him to be ready. Then he turned confidently and walked away, leaving the protagonist silently watching him. At that moment, Christian remembered someone else who also took promises seriously. That memory strengthened his determination to protect everything he believed in. In the training room, already sitting on his bed, the protagonist held a sphere in his hands. As he observed it, he thought there were only 2 weeks left until the ritual of the sacred ebony. He seemed to be building up the courage to consume the sphere, hesitating for just a moment longer. And when he finally gathered enough courage, he took a bite. Despite the taste being absolutely awful, he immediately felt that it wasn't just the taste that was intense, but the energy within the sphere too. So he lay down and began channeling the energy coursing through his body as soon as possible. He focused on the energy that began to flow from the top of his head, much more intense than expected. The ebony sphere seemed to contain a fusion of light energy and the deepest darkness. He thought that maybe the ecstasy felt by the beast at death had fused into the essence of that matter. And that was why people said the human mind struggled to fully absorb ebony. But for him, it wasn't a problem, as his mind had been trained and prepared to deal with chaos. All that was left was to deal with the light energy, now that he had fully absorbed the dark energy. When the time came to channel the light, he had to take a completely different approach. Unlike most who expelled that energy, he gathered everything into the inner core of light. Suddenly, his eyes opened, glowing with an intense and radiant golden hue. In that instant, he felt the full magnitude contained in the ebony sphere and understood its true potential. 2 weeks had passed since the day the protagonist consumed the ebony sphere. At that moment, his younger brother was pounding hard on the door, eager to demand the promised honorable duel. Christian asked the boy to come in, and upon seeing him, he immediately noticed how much stronger he had become. This left him momentarily speechless, eyes wide and mouth slightly open in surprise. With a sarcastic smile, the protagonist asked why his brother was looking for him so early, questioning if he really wanted to get beaten up, and if so, he'd be glad to help. Thurn noticed that his brother's magical pressure was completely different from 15 days ago. Even though he knew Christian had gotten stronger, he had no intention of backing down. The protagonist stated that if Thurn really wanted to get beaten up, he'd be more than happy to oblige. However, he added a condition. If Thurn lost, he'd have to promise to give up on participating in the ritual of the sacred ebony. Christian explained that, as his brother already knew, it would be like a battlefield, and the weak should stay out. Those words made Thurn completely lose control, as usual, and he drew his sword, demanding his brother do the same. The protagonist replied that his brother still hadn't understood his true intentions, and if necessary, he forced that understanding into his stubborn little head. As Thurn charged in full force, he left a huge opening and was easily countered. Right after, we saw the scene of the young man lying on the ground, covered in bruises, while their father scolded them both. The Count declared that Christian had gone too far with his brother, and that after this, perhaps it would be best if Thurn skipped this year's ritual. Christian, however, asked if he could speak with his brother alone for a while, assuring that they would straighten things out. The Count, believing that a moment between the two brothers might help, agreed and left, leaving a heavy atmosphere in the room. Christian looked at Thurn and asked if he was upset, saying he was acting like the petty ones from the Alliance. Thurn replied that his brother seemed to hate him, as if he no longer wanted to see him grow or achieve his own power. He said that every time he improved, Christian ignored his accomplishments and mocked his progress. He accused his brother of hurting him on purpose just to prevent him from participating in the ebony ritual. The protagonist, watching the boy nearly in tears, explained that it was all just a big misunderstanding. He said he only wanted his brother to truly grow stronger and be ready at the right time. He explained that if they competed in the ritual, Thurn would lose the chance to obtain the Shadow Demon, as he wasn't ready. He stated that their duel had been necessary to break Thurn's stubbornness, since the Shadow Demon didn't suit him. According to Christian, what really matched Thurn was the Pale Demon, and that's what he should aim for. Just like light magic was divided into various branches, demons also had different variations and levels. The shadow demon was the highest among the lesser ones, and the pale demon came just below it. Christian explained that, in comparison, it was easier to master cursed magic than to directly face the domain of darkness. He also said that during their duel, he could see that Thurn had really fought with everything he had. He said that if Thurn accepted the shadow demon before mastering the pale one, he would have great difficulties later on. That's why he asked him to think carefully before joining the ritual, as his only wish was to see his brother grow, like any good older brother would. He then showed Thurn a gift wrapped in a blue cloth. As soon as the boy saw what it was, he recognized it immediately, an extremely rare and valuable healing stone. He asked his brother why he was giving him that, and Christian replied that it was simply because he liked him. Thurn clutched the gift tightly, holding back tears, unable to believe the change in Christian's attitude. He said he wished his brother had changed before they lost their mother. He revealed that she had suffered a lot because of Christian's rebellious and inconsiderate behavior. The protagonist, sitting by his brother's bed, admitted that he hadn't really understood that kind of feeling before. Meanwhile, in the main mansion of the lineage, everyone was preparing for the big day. Several carriages were arriving, and among them was the one carrying Christian and Maya. The protagonist was intrigued by the distance they had traveled and was thinking about the difficulties of opening a teleportation portal. He believed that that family just wanted to mark their territory. Maya, on the other hand, was extremely happy to be so close to the young master. Radiant, she thought it was amazing that the two of them were together at such an important event. Since the number of companions was limited to just one, and she had sworn loyalty, she was chosen to go with him. As soon as they arrived, Christian noticed several people whispering around him. He asked Maya if she knew who those people were, but the murmurs stopped as soon as they saw who he was talking to. Some didn't understand why the head butler of the family was talking to Christian, since they saw him only as a troublemaker. Simon observed the protagonist closely and noticed that, in just 1 month, he had changed a lot. That wasn't the reason he was there, however. He had come under direct orders from Lord Novaju. Seeing the confusion in Christian's eyes, Simon repeated what he had said before. Right after, another member of the house arrived and asked if the young man hadn't been surprised by all of that. In that large hall, a wide window with red curtains was opened, lighting up the room. The butler led Christian to the old patriarch of the house, announcing that the visitor had arrived. The elder confirmed he had understood. He looked at Christian and said it had been a long time since he'd seen him, then released all of his magical pressure. Even with that gaze that seemed to peer straight into his soul, the protagonist stood firm. Despite being an overwhelming presence, so intense he could barely stay on his feet, the protagonist believed that unleashing all that energy, even knowing others couldn't bear it, was something vulgar. So he clenched his fist and stood his ground, even though he could hardly remain upright. He greeted the Lord, saying he paid his respects to the great master of dark wizards. The Lord looked directly at him and asked if the sudden summons had scared the boy, but Christian replied that he had already expected to be called, since he was a rising star. The Lord agreed, saying that even Marion and Simon hadn't stopped praising him. However, that man had a different perspective. He thought that maybe, just maybe, the young man could live up to his expectations. Faced with those words, the protagonist remained silent, simply waiting to hear what would be said next. The man commented that no matter how promising a seed may be, no one could ever truly know how it would grow. It might end up being just a weak sprout that barely emerges from the ground before withering. However, the protagonist saw things differently. He acknowledged that the man's words weren't exactly wrong. Still, he was fully convinced that this sprout would defy expectations and grow into a mighty tree, or perhaps even more, become the very sky that looms above the trees. But in the end, only time would tell. Turning his head toward the young man, the older man said he would be eagerly awaiting the day that happened. With that, he told the young man he could leave, and upon hearing that, Christian bowed respectfully as he exited. Soon after, Miriam asked her father what he thought of the young men. The man replied that the boy had completely surpassed his expectations. However, he also believed that because he possessed such exceptional talent, his fate would likely be even crueler. Even so, he said that on that day, a small spark of hope had begun to bloom in his heart. His words even startled his own daughter. She had never seen her father place so much hope in someone before. He remarked that perhaps that child truly was capable of fulfilling his oldest wish. As time passed, the eve of the sacred ebony ritual finally arrived. Everything was gleaming and perfectly prepared to receive the candidates. The butlers formally announced the arrival of Christian, the eldest son of Count Khazar, and so entered the young master Christian van Baron Khazar, presenting himself in a strikingly imposing manner. As he walked through the grand hall, the guests murmured about how the patriarch had recognized someone like Christian. But he had already anticipated this kind of reaction from everyone, mostly due to the lifestyle the real Christian had led until then. Besides, there was another factor that simply couldn't be ignored. He was, in fact, far too handsome, and that also drew a lot of attention. Spotting a waiter serving wine, he quickly grew curious and asked if it was an alcoholic beverage. The glasses on the tray had caught his eye, especially because of the strawberry liquor they held. However, he wasn't allowed to be served, as he was not yet old enough to drink. Instead, they offered him a refreshing ginger soda, a beverage more appropriate for his age. Still, that left him indignant. He thought demons didn't need to be such uptight rule followers. While he was thinking about that, he heard the announcement that the young lords and ladies were entering. He turned his head to look. The door, maintaining a sense of mystery, slowly began to open. From it emerged the lords and ladies. The four of them paraded out as if they truly were the crown jewels of the ceremony. The first to enter was Ashid of Barum. He was the second prince, someone Christian definitely didn't want to clash with. Next was Urian of Barum, the first princess, someone he had been warned to be extremely cautious around. In third came Jupin of Barum, the second princess of the house, a young woman ahead of her time. Lastly came the third prince, Misak of Barum, a person who had remained a complete mystery until now. Thus the four passed close to Christian, who quickly noticed that the first prince, known as the Mad One, had not appeared. That was good news, since the first prince, with his long white hair, didn't always attend such festivities. Christian wanted to understand what Ashid intended to say to him, especially after having tried to frame him and create victims through his schemes. To his surprise, the young man simply walked right past him and, as if he were a cockroach, ignored him completely. That filled him with rage. He thought that after trying to ruin him, the guy couldn't even look him in the eye. He quickly concluded that, indeed, he was seen by that prince as nothing more than an insignificant ant. Close by, and making a formal greeting gesture, passed the first princess. She was Lady Urian. At first glance, he noticed nothing particularly unusual about her. He remembered the warning from his aunt, who had advised him to be especially careful with the first princess. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't detect anything strange in her actions or behavior. He decided to set it aside for now, thinking he would uncover it bit by bit. He believed he had already gathered enough information for the time being. Suddenly, someone near him coughed and promptly greeted the young Master Christian. The man introduced himself, saying he was a summoner in the service of young Master Loin. The protagonist turned to the man, trying to keep the conversation civil. However, the man was extremely hostile, stating that, unfortunately, he had heard that someone completely unqualified would be taking part in the event. Naturally, Christian asked if that weak participant happened to be him. The man, without hesitation, confirmed it and said that, if it wasn't him, he should prove otherwise right away. Christian realized who the true rival was. He was watching him from above, full of contempt. It was the young Master Loin, who stared at Christian with pure hatred in his eyes. As he thought about it, the protagonist wondered why, if that young man had so many complaints, he didn't come speak to him directly. Placing his ginger soda on the table, Christian decided to save the best for the day of the ritual. For now, he preferred to provoke the guy a bit more, saying he wouldn't even need a weapon to deal with him. The man, visibly irritated, claimed that Christian would deeply regret everything he was saying, though the young man still wore a completely mocking expression. He was also being closely watched by the two princesses, who gazed down at him as if he were a mere insignificant being. Of course, he took the opportunity to carefully observe the way the first princess was staring at him. The guests simply couldn't believe that a summoning was being performed right in the middle of the ballroom. Looking closer, they noticed that the summoner was being scolded by several spirits who were trying to hit him in a chaotic frenzy. Meanwhile, elsewhere, someone was getting a massage and being treated like a true lord. That's when everyone realized that the real official spirit summoner had been the one responsible for calling forth those entities. He was the one who had originally summoned the evil spirits and directed them straight toward Christian. The young man, with just a simple movement of his finger, managed to completely transform the spirits. He had taken total control of all the entities with a single effortless gesture. Now Christian stood up, asking what had just happened and whether all of that had been ordered by young Master Loin. As he spoke, Loin stared at him with eyes full of hate, feeling both scorned and humiliated. The protagonist made sure to say that, if the young man had a problem, he could very well challenge him to a duel. But his opponent deflected, claiming that none of it had anything to do with him and that it was all the summoner's doing, who had acted on his own. Even the summoner himself thought it was cruel to be abandoned like that, especially when he had just been following orders. Even so, Christian decided he would settle everything during the day of the Sacred Darkness ceremony. He believed that the young master was a complete coward, but swore he would teach him proper manners in a way he would never forget. Finally, the day of the Sacred Darkness ceremony had arrived, and everyone was gathered in a massive hall. While many were showing signs of fear, anxiety, and nervousness, Christian was simply yawning, completely relaxed, even while surrounded by them all. The blonde youth approached, asking if he wasn't nervous, especially after all the trouble he had caused. Meanwhile, the arrogant young Master Loin descended the stairs nonchalantly. He was firmly convinced that he was the most capable one to complete that ritual with total glory and perfection. The protagonist just watched him, already thinking they'd settle things right after the ritual. Soon after, someone announced that the ritual was about to begin and asked if all participants were present. He then introduced himself as Sebastian, the assistant butler in charge of the main mansion. He informed everyone that from that moment on, he would be the one guiding the young participants to the sacred site where the ceremony would take place. In front of them all, Sebastian conjured up a kind of illusory portal resembling a basement, or perhaps an alternate dimension. The protagonist knew very well that, in truth, it was just an illusion, a sort of virtual space created specifically for the ritual. At the lead was Sebastian, moving with his staff in a remarkably swift manner, just like a real elf should. So fast, in fact, that the others began to fall behind, forced to rush so they wouldn't get lost along the way. Thus, most panicked, running like madmen, afraid of being left behind and failing the exam. On the other hand, a few kept their composure, moving quickly but with control and focus, following Sebastian closely. Only a very small number could keep up with the pace, step by step, of the one leading them. Meanwhile, most of the participants were sweating heavily, thinking the whole thing was far too irrational to comprehend. The deeper they descended underground, the steeper and more difficult everything became. Even the little blonde and the young master, who considered himself the best of all, couldn't make sense of that absurd slope. Still, everyone kept going down, until Sebastian looked back and ordered everyone to hurry up immediately. He warned that the floor wouldn't support them for much longer, and as soon as he said that, some of them began to plunge into the void. There were those who, upon looking back and seeing the others falling, were thrown into utter despair. That test, beyond demanding physical endurance, was also extremely psychological, and anyone with a weak mind would surely be unable to withstand it. Sebastian noticed they were far behind schedule and therefore ordered them to pick up the pace even more. That forced everyone to run even faster, trying not to be left behind. After some time, most had already fallen, defeated by their own illusions and inner weaknesses. At that moment, young Loin looked satisfied, believing that most of the useless worms had already been eliminated. However, when he looked to the side and realized that Christian wasn't even sweating, he was utterly shocked. The protagonist simply stared back at him with a mocking smile, making it clear that this was incredibly easy for him. Provocatively, he asked Loin if he was tired, saying that, in the end, he seemed strong only on the outside. He remarked that, being from the main bloodline, Loin probably relied more on expensive potions than actual training. Anyone with a weak mind would suffer physically, since moving linearly through an illusionary space was extremely draining. But for Christian, getting tired was not an option. No matter how much effort was required, all he needed to do was slightly distort the space magic formula, and everything became simpler. Meanwhile, Sebastian, looking back, noticed that the young man was progressing through the trial with complete calm and ease. He knew perfectly well that this was Christian, the young master everyone had spoken so poorly about. Only a few had managed to make it through the corridors up to that point. The place was extremely dark, so they had to light several candles and lamps to illuminate the circle where everyone was supposed to gather. The four who adapted best to the test were now gathered around Sebastian, awaiting the next stage. Meanwhile, Christian asked the blonde boy if he was doing okay, adding that maybe he should have trained a bit more. Suddenly, a voice spoke to them. It seemed to come from a magical stone that was slowly taking on a more defined shape. The protagonist watched carefully as a bright light began to shine over all of them, announcing that this was indeed a sacred place. Soon, that presence took physical form, introducing itself as the administrator of that space and welcoming all the young masters. That entity informed them that the young masters, along with the third demon lord currently in power, would have the chance to acquire a powerful dark mage. With that, an ancient magic was activated, and a magical arrow began to point out the path meant for each of the participants. The administrator began casting a spell on all the candidates, marking each of them appropriately. He explained that the amount of power available there wasn't enough for all the young masters to share. In addition, the beasts that inhabited that place would be responsible for testing whether each young master was truly qualified. Upon hearing that, Christian raised his hand and asked bluntly if what he meant was that whoever arrived first would get everything. The administrator, looking at Christian, acknowledged that, as expected, he was extremely sharp. He then asked whether, if something unexpected were to happen to the other competitors during the ritual, it would result in disqualification. The administrator replied that, since the paths were different and separated, it was unlikely they would cross. A countdown began, making it clear that they shouldn't waste time getting into conflicts with other participants. Everyone was already properly prepared, and the administrator emphasized that each one should focus solely on their own safety. Young Master Loin could barely contain his excitement, waiting for the moment when they would all be sent to their assigned paths. When the moment finally arrived, the administrator wished them all good luck, and each of them dashed toward their designated route. In the center, only the administrator and Sebastian, the goblin responsible for leading them to that place, remained. Sebastian, curious, asked the entity if it wanted to place a bet on who would win the competition. The entity, which until then had been very serious and silent, considered whether it should at least enjoy itself a little and accept the bet. Meanwhile, the contest was growing more intense, and the candles continued to burn, dimly lighting the tense environment. In a long, well-lit corridor, some of the young masters were running hurriedly toward their respective destinations. At the end of one of the doors, there was a deep darkness from which several glowing eyes could be seen watching those who approached. In front of the door, a massive creature appeared with at least 4 eyes. It growled menacingly, making it clear that it was extremely savage. It was ready to face any young master who dared to cross through that portal. For participant Loin, that didn't seem like such a big challenge. He gathered energy in his hands and began facing the wild beast. He believed it would be easy for him. However, he truly hoped, from the bottom of his heart, that it would be extremely difficult for Christian, even wishing for his failure. In fact, he found amusement just imagining his rival completely crushed, desperately fighting for his life. Originally, all paths were supposed to be the same length and have balanced trials. However, one of the responsible sorcerers had been bribed and therefore placed much stronger beasts along Christian's path. Now he would have to face extremely powerful monsters both in the west, the east, and the south. Everything had been coldly calculated so that Christian would suffer a tragic accident during the ritual. If something happened to any participant during that ceremony, no one would question it. That place would simply become Christian's grave. When he finally reached the gates he believed led to the sacred land, Loin was pleased, certain he was the first to arrive. However, he heard a familiar voice. It was Christian, who said he was late and asked what had taken him so long. With his arms crossed, Christian claimed he was almost dying of boredom from waiting. In disbelief, Loin asked how he had managed to get there so quickly. Bringing a hand to his mouth, he muttered that it was impossible. After all, there were incredibly strong monsters along that route. With a light, provocative smile, Christian replied that now everything made sense. He finally understood that Loin's level wasn't all that high after all. It was clear to him that it had just been a poorly executed setup, something the young lord didn't like hearing one bit. Christian then warned him that for a while they'd be alone there, and that was more than enough time to teach him some manners. He clenched his fists, ready to fight. Loin claimed he was prepared, since it was forbidden for competitors to fight during the ritual. However, he argued that if it was for self-defense, there would be no penalties, so he decided he would crush Christian right there. But when he tried to land the first blow, Christian simply dodged, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. The protagonist quickly realized his opponent was using martial arts, combining close-range bursts of magical power with physical combat techniques. He was using joint locks and fast strikes to try and neutralize his opponent. However, no matter how many times he tried, Loin just didn't realize it was pointless. Christian would dodge as many times as needed. The young master started to lose control, cursing and getting increasingly furious, convinced he'd eventually catch Christian off guard. Christian, on the other hand, took advantage of the fact they were alone, and raising his hand, seriously considered that this was the perfect moment to put him in his place. Smiling wickedly, he said that young lord really was very naive. Then he made an unexpected move. He grabbed his opponent's hand and squeezed with tremendous force, making it clear that his intention was to teach him a lesson, practically. And to educate him, he decided it would be necessary to break his arm. The pain surely would make the rival learn something. Christian even warned him that if it hurt, he could cry all he wanted. And without delay, he simply broke the opponent's arm. The young lord screamed in pain like he had never experienced in his life. Completely shaken, he let out an agonizing scream that quickly drew the attention of those nearby. Soon after, the little blonde showed up in a hurry, having heard the screams, and ran to the scene in desperation, shouting that it was already too late. The protagonist was sitting down, and near him were two young men lying on the ground, looking as if they were just taking a nap. Faced with that, Christian asked the little blonde if he preferred to lie down quietly and sleep, or if he would need a little motivation for that. The blonde stubbornly said he wasn't there to fool around and that, if necessary, he would charge at him. But it didn't take long, just a single blow, and he immediately changed his mind, lay on the ground, and decided to sleep. Christian knew that 5 years from now, the first war against the Alliance would take place. Before that, he needed to secure the Dark Mage at any cost. That's why he was convinced that not a single grain of the sacred darkness could be shared with anyone. He believed that now, everything was resolved, and that he alone would walk through the gates. As he saw them starting to open, he believed that was the moment to claim the sacred darkness entirely for himself. He knew that the sacred ritual of darkness was the power that granted the possibility of becoming a true transcendent. The elder chief of the clan was known for having absorbed 80% of the sacred darkness, currently ranking among the strongest living. Even among the demon monarchs, the Dark Destroyer had absorbed more than 90% of pure dark energy. Because of that, he became a demon king, which meant he was required to take in 100% of the pure dark energy. Standing before that massive magical sphere, shrouded in magic and darkness, he believed that if he absorbed it, he could surpass everyone. He imagined he would become greater even than the demon emperor. Because of that, he knew exactly what needed to be done in that moment. He extended his hand toward the sphere, determined to absorb as much dark energy as possible. Meanwhile, in a meeting, some members found it unbelievable that everyone except Christian had been eliminated. It was considered a disaster, especially since even young Master Loin had been left in an extremely critical condition. There were suspicions that perhaps Christian had used some trick, or even a forbidden magical tool. Because of that, they were seriously considering launching a thorough investigation in order to impose an exemplary punishment. The second young lady, however, said that wouldn't be necessary. She firmly believed he wouldn't even be able to enter the sacred fields. The fact that he hadn't left the sacred place in 2 days surely had to mean something. They believed it was taking him so long because he was struggling to absorb the massive amount of dark energy. Or perhaps he had already been crushed by the sacred darkness itself, being completely destroyed. The young woman believed there wouldn't even be a body left to bury. She was absolutely convinced that boy wouldn't survive. She left the meeting, causing great confusion, as many thought she was being hasty. After walking a few steps, she suddenly stopped. She thought that, even if he returned alive, she would personally make sure he was eliminated. She remembered well that when her father died in a battle against the Alliance, Loin and she were adopted by their uncle, Viscount Langham. Because of that, her position within the clan was already unstable by nature. Now, with her brother having failed to inherit the sacred darkness, everything had gotten worse. No one would support her family as successors anymore, so she had to act immediately. She was determined. Christian would pay for all the humiliation she and her brother had endured. Meanwhile, some maids were gossiping that the useless boy, good for nothing, still hadn't come out of the ritual. However, watching them closely was Maya, the ghost who waited anxiously for her young master. She believed that soon, she would be able to see him again. Maya clearly heard the cruel remarks from the maids, and was not about to let it slide. In a firm voice, she said that her heart longed for her young master's return, but if those maids continued being insolent, she would personally take care of them. She declared that if they insisted, she would turn them into ghosts under her control. With that, the demon maids ran off, terrified, since they were deeply afraid of the ghost. Even so, Maya remained worried. She felt that her young master was taking too long, but she had not lost hope and continued waiting patiently, wishing with all her might for his return. Meanwhile, Christian was in an isolated place. His expression was strange. He could barely keep his eyes open. He believed that darkness was infinite, something that even seemed to suck the air from his lungs, and that only represented 70% of the energy absorbed. He realized everything was becoming much harder than he had expected. Still, he knew he had to endure, no matter what. The real trial would only begin after reaching 90%. If he absorbed beyond the limit, it could damage his core. If that happened, he would die before the war against the Alliance even began. That's when he had an idea. He possessed the Draconic Heart, a type of core based on dragons, capable of storing an absurdly larger amount of mana. Even if only for a few minutes, he could imitate that type of heart. So he immediately began the experiment. And luckily for him, it worked. He started absorbing the dark energy, though at one point, he thought maybe he should stop. Then, unexpectedly, a voice echoed, asking if he would like some help. A figure appeared right in front of him. That being had golden horns, just like their hair. Christian thought it might be Mathena. He didn't know how that demon had entered the sacred space, but he understood that a demon's power was directly tied to their ability to communicate with the darkness. So it wasn't much of a challenge for her. Mathena, with a casual tone, said she could help him without asking for anything in return. He was uncertain. He wanted to understand why someone would want to help him like that for no reason. Smiling in a peculiar way, she explained that she was doing it merely on a fleeting whim and suggested that he take her hand. If he did, he would be able to absorb all of the sacred darkness at once. After that moment, a week passed. We then saw the vampire butler, with red hair, standing before someone calmly drinking tea from a beautiful porcelain cup. The lord and patriarch of that family, wearing an optimistic expression, was anxiously awaiting good news. He wanted to know if Christian was still alive. Meanwhile, Christian's aunt believed he had been far too greedy. She considered it reckless to desire so much power. The vampire agreed and informed Viscount Langham that the acting leader shared the same opinion. He said that soon they wished to close the path to the sacred fields and wanted to know if he should carry out the order immediately. The patriarch, impatient, believed that Dan Brat was just trying to test the patience of an old man like him. He then questioned whether the butler really believed that the irresponsible Christian was still alive. The butler replied that, although the chances were close to zero, that young master was, in fact, very intriguing. Because of that, the patriarch decided to give one more day. He would wait only that extra time, and if Christian didn't return, the deadline would be closed for good. That was his order. The butler should immediately inform that the path would remain open for one more day. Christian's aunt breathed a sigh of relief. At least for now, he still had a chance to return. In front of that imposing mansion with a breathtaking landscape, the butler set off to carry out his lord's command. Meanwhile, still within the ritual, the protagonist fought against an intense pain he felt in his chest. The demon in front of him stretched out its hands, saying he should hurry before it was too late. Even with all that pain in his chest, the protagonist just stared at the demon and refused its help. The demon, surprised, didn't understand why he wouldn't accept. It knew that absorbing 100% of the shadow essence was far beyond permitted limits. However, the protagonist made it clear that the demon had forgotten something very important. He clenched his fists and declared that this was a conceptual space, which made the demon realize he wasn't just an ordinary mortal. It had to see with its own eyes. In that moment, the protagonist began to radiate an intense light, making it clear what he was about to do. She observed closely every detail of the transformation he was undergoing, now with demonic eyes. Soon, large reddish horns sprouted from his head. In a short time, the demonification was complete. It was the secret technique of the mystical bloodline, a forbidden magic, in which a mortal temporarily transformed into a demon in order to withstand explosive power. However, it was so destructive to the caster's body that, in the past, even Lena had died after using it. Yet, by removing all spells that strengthened demonic energy within that conceptual space, it would be possible to create only the vessel without any penalties, and that was exactly what the protagonist did. After that, he began absorbing more than 90% of the shadow essence. Perhaps he could absorb it all. Meanwhile, that demonic being couldn't believe what she was seeing. She stood before the legendary Black Crescent Moon. How could a mere mortal insect have transcended his own physical body? Now she was even more curious about him. He, on the other hand, asked arrogantly if she didn't know he was a genius. At that moment, he had every reason to consider himself reckless. After all, he had just proven it through his actions. Then he said he was leaving. He had a life to take care of, and he wanted her to stay right where she was. As he began to walk away, the demoness tried, somehow, to find a reason or situation that would make them meet again. She watched every movement, hoping his response would, somehow, be positive. When he was almost completely gone, he shot a cold look at her. That gaze seemed to fill the entire conceptual space, but he couldn't simply leave without sending a message. So he made a simple gesture, showing her one of his fingers, making it very clear that he had no interest in forming a contract with her. That demoness, although extremely powerful, didn't understand the specific meaning of that gesture. Even so, the protagonist left, while some time later she began laughing to herself. Shortly after leaving, he spoke to himself in a serious tone, saying he would be insane to want to see her again. He looked around, trying to understand how much time had passed since the ritual began. By his calculations, he had been there for about a week. He believed the main house must be in total upheaval. So he dispelled his horns and removed all demonic aura, as he didn't want to cause an unnecessary scandal. On the contrary, he thought it would be more fun to play a little trick on everyone. Meanwhile, a butler appeared in a hurry, bringing the news directly to the Marcus. He reported that young Christian had returned, and everyone at the meeting table could hardly believe what they were hearing. The Marquis, however, knew that the news must have more to it, so he asked the butler to explain further. That interim patriarch of the dark bloodline, Lainam de Baram, listened carefully as the man reported that the boy had survived. However, he survived by a thread, and was in a state of extreme exhaustion. Those were the healer's own words. They said he seemed incapable of properly controlling his own energy. Everyone present at the meeting believed that absorbing more than 80% of the shadow essence had been pure greed. Now they believed that because of his irresponsible behavior, everyone had lost an immense amount of essence and that he should be punished. The Marcus seemed to agree with everyone, but asked them to leave, saying he would hold another meeting later. Once only he and his son remained, he asked if everything he had heard was really true, while the son stood silently by his side. The young man simply tapped his fingers on the table, waiting to hear the full truth about Christian's core. He replied that he had been with the healer, and it seemed that, indeed, what had happened was serious. That useless boy's core was truly damaged. In silence, the Marquis continued tapping his fingers, now more forcefully, against the table. The young man simply watched attentively, waiting to see what his father's next move would be in light of that situation. The man, in turn, stared fixedly downward, as if searching for some kind of answer on the surface of the table. The longer the silence stretched, the more the boy remained still, simply watching with his head slightly lowered. However, when Loin's name was mentioned, the young man immediately showed interest in the conversation. The Marcus' plan had been to use Loin as an heir, while also making him a sacrifice in the venomous bloodline scheme. The man's strategy had included eliminating both Loin and Jupin at once, but everything had failed. Now, on top of that, he had to deal with Christian, who was starting to catch the attention of the family's patriarch. The Marcus, the second son, observed everything quietly, while his father remained tapping on the table, deep in thought. At last, the Marcus' order was clear. Christian was to be taken to the Hall of Shadows the next day. He would decide that boy's fate in front of all the vassals. It would be a public humiliation, which he was determined to make Christian face. According to the Marcus' plan, he managed to bring Christian to the center of a stage prepared specifically for him. The protagonist realized that man was truly intent on turning him into the target of public ridicule. Looking to the sides, he noticed that many highly prestigious figures were present to witness the spectacle. Even the second prince was among the attendees, which clearly indicated that something bigger was at play. The man responsible for it all summoned Christian and declared that he had made a mistake during the ritual. The young man confirmed that he was aware of it, but the man demanded that he state exactly what the mistake had been. Christian replied that his mistake had been not crushing more firmly those brothers who weren't worthy of the family's prestige. It was clear he was referring to Loin. Upon hearing this, Loin's sister could barely contain herself, overwhelmed with the urge to intervene. However, the Marcus ordered her to be silent. The official accusation was that Christian had monopolized a precious family resource. When told that he should have achieved great accomplishments, the young man asked what exactly those accomplishments should have been. The Marcus responded that he should have reached at least 70% purity, and that any value lower than 75% was unacceptable. Christian then wanted to know what would happen if he hadn't reached that percentage. What in the end would the punishment be? The Marquis explained that if that were the case, no dark magical technique would be passed on to him. Additionally, he would be permanently banished from the main house. He would also lose any right to inherit the title of Count Khazar. Upon hearing this, Christian asked how they intended to evaluate his accomplishments. That's when the second prince raised his hand, showing interest in joining the discussion. He explained that although Christian's core was conflicted and murky due to magic overload, it was still possible to assess its purity. He said that in a direct confrontation, even with 70%, the quality of magic could be judged. This was because, when the amount of mana was equal, the wielder of dark magic would always prevail, provided their purity was higher. In other words, that type of combat was an effective way to destroy an opponent's core. The protagonist quickly realized that man was even more despicable than he had imagined, but he accepted the challenge. However, he imposed one condition. He would demonstrate a sufficiently high-level accomplishment, but in return, he demanded to be allowed to take part in the succession trial for the title of young master. At first, everyone appeared surprised, but the second prince agreed. The Marcus' second son stated that in that clan, what mattered wasn't being of the main or secondary bloodline, but strength itself. He warned Christian that during the magical conflict, he should release only the necessary amount of energy. He cautioned that if he mismanaged his mana, it could permanently damage his core. He also said that even if there was a difference in purity, Christian didn't need to worry, and thus the duel began. At first, their powers seemed evenly matched. Christian, however, just smiled and suggested that his opponent be careful with his precious core. Those words were not well received by the Marcus' second son, who immediately increased the amount of energy he was releasing. However, with a simple hand gesture, Christian anticipated the attack and completely nullified the opponent's dark energy. That left the young man even more intrigued, as he realized Christian wasn't at a lower level, as he had assumed, but rather 2 levels higher in magic. Even so, he kept attacking, while Christian used only the necessary amount of energy to defend himself. However, when he noticed that his opponent was beginning to dangerously push beyond his own limits, he decided to change strategies. He firmly grasped that minimal energy still being released, clenched his fist, and said with a tone of disdain that it was a pathetic disappointment. He remarked that his opponent thought himself so superior, but in the end was nothing more than someone irrelevant. That completely threw his opponent over the edge. Blinded by rage, he decided to release a reckless amount of energy, enough to destroy Christian's core for good. The crowd, realizing what was happening, screamed in desperation, begging the young master not to use a level 4 spell, as that could be extremely dangerous. They believed that if he went through with it, he would end up outright destroying his rival's core, in this case, Christian's. But that man didn't want to listen. He released an absurd amount of dark energy. The spell was so powerful that it took the form of a dragon, which was immediately obliterated by Christian's spells. That left the Marcus' second son completely stunned. He thought it would be easy to defeat a mere bastard. However, he had to hear the same warning words Christian had said earlier. The protagonist warned that his opponent should be careful with his own core, as things were going beyond the limit. Ashid, now desperate, watched as all that energy turned against him, without any chance to react. As soon as the magical thread snapped, he felt deep pain. His core was severely damaged. Several of those watching the duel clearly noticed the struggle the young master was showing. Nevertheless, Christian was displeased, as he had come very close to completely destroying his core. Even so, it was clear that the Marcus' second son had suffered serious damage. Still, he wiped his mouth, took a deep breath, and with difficulty, acknowledged that Christian had reached a purity level of 90%. Now it was confirmed, and everyone, even those who were against it, had to accept the fact that Christian possessed more than 90% dark purity. Smiling confidently, Christian stated that he now had the legitimate right to the title of young master. The Marquis, however, looked at him with complete indifference, making it clear he didn't want someone like Christian in the family's social circle. Wearing a serious expression and giving off a strange aura, he remained with his hands resting on the table, without saying a single word. Faced with this, the man began tapping his fingers on the table, showing a bit of anxiety. He stated that a deal was a deal. Christian could take the test to become the young master. However, the participation of someone from a secondary family was completely unprecedented. For that reason, he declared that the test method would be decided arbitrarily by him. First, the young man would need to prove his aptitude, and then earn the merits required to assume the title of young master. Still in that luxurious, brightly lit room, someone asked how exactly he was supposed to prove his aptitude. The man was direct. He said Christian had to reach level 3 within 3 months. To Christian, that was no problem at all. Being a genius, he believed it wouldn't be difficult to achieve that goal. The Marquis simply looked at him and declared that he would await his presence within that 3-month period. After that meeting ended, the Marquis remained seated in his armchair, sipping tea while scolding his son. He spoke to Ashid calmly, though it was clear how disappointed he was. Both of them knew the fault was entirely Ashid's, who had underestimated his opponent, and because of that had even severely damaged his own core. Even so, the Marquis believed the situation would soon resolve itself, because with 70% purity, it would be extremely difficult to evolve. He knew that the higher the purity of absorbed magic, the harder it became to progress to the next levels. If Christian truly possessed a purity of 90%, it would be practically impossible to reach level 3 within the given time frame. The Marquis concluded that no matter how talented he was, Christian would not be able to overcome that barrier. Meanwhile, a carefully prepared dish with a beautiful and extremely delicious meal was served to Christian. It was his personal maid who, with great affection, expressed how wonderful and charming her young master was. She spoke about how she felt during all that time she had anxiously waited for him. Every day truly felt like an eternity. Upon hearing those words, Christian's eyes lit up with a different kind of glow. He recalled his past life when he was still Chris, and remembered how his former companions always cared deeply for him. Even the smallest injury would immediately draw everyone's full attention to him. Among them all, there was Lanya, who who always showed care, concern, and affection for every gesture or difficulty he faced. In this life, now as Christian, it had been a long time since he had felt any real warmth in his heart. Since the moment he escaped that hellish family that only wanted his end, his entire existence seemed to move toward destruction. Even in that cruel environment, he managed to surround himself with people who truly cared about him. They were warm souls who always guided him, no matter where he went. At that moment, he had Maya, his loyal maid, who clearly showed sincere affection and care. He remembered that, in his past life, he had heard similar words but never had time to express his thanks. So he looked into Maya's eyes and with a gentle tone, thanked her for waiting so eagerly for him. Those words filled the young maid's heart with joy. To her, it finally felt like her master acknowledged her feelings. Christian tried to play it down, saying it wasn't a big deal, and that she didn't need to talk about hearts. After all, she didn't even have one. Even so, he decided to give her something special. He offered to take her for a walk as a reward. That left Maya completely surprised and extremely excited, as it had never crossed her mind that she might get a chance to walk alongside her young master. She was so thrilled that she ended up startling him a bit, so with a smile, she asked that they hurry before she got even more carried away. They left the room and began walking through the immense garden of that colossal castle. She was so content that she started picking the most beautiful flowers she found along the way. Meanwhile, Christian simply watched her, admiring how happy she looked just walking beside him. He too was enjoying the moment. It had been a long time since he had felt such genuine peace. Reaching level 3 in 3 months wouldn't be easy, but he decided he would worry about that later. Suddenly, a voice caught his attention. It was his aunt, who wanted to know if he was still causing trouble. He greeted her politely, and she asked how he could go for a walk so casually given his current situation. Although he had thought she would be his tutor, she quickly informed him that she couldn't take on that role, but she would take him to someone else. She only asked that he follow her. With that, Christian turned and said goodbye to Maya, telling her he'd be going out and wouldn't return until night. The protagonist then followed her through the long corridors of the castle, which seemed to stretch endlessly. At the end, they descended a staircase just as long as the hallway itself. As they walked, Christian commented that, although he didn't know what kind of tutor this person would be, he was grateful she had thought of him. His aunt, however, said he shouldn't give thanks before meeting the person, but that she hoped he would experience what was to come. She explained that, for the record, none of the brothers had been able to properly keep up with that tutor's teachings. She stated this was an opportunity that might never come again, and for that reason, she wanted him to give his best and not let her down. However, suddenly, Christian stopped. Something along the way caught his attention. There was a child standing precisely between 2 staircases, right in the middle of the path. He observed carefully and commented to his aunt that it looked like there was a lost child in that place. However, that child with light-colored hair and an extremely imposing posture simply stared at him with complete disdain. Concerned for the child, he approached, placed his hand on the young boy's head, and asked where his parents were. However, the boy didn't seem at all comfortable with such closeness, and it was precisely at that moment that the protagonist realized it. He quickly pulled his hand away from the boy's head, thinking that couldn't possibly be real. Suddenly, his aunt said something unexpected. She wanted him to greet the boy, for that child was, in fact, the incarnation of the patriarch. Upon realizing who stood before him, he promptly saluted the head of the house, but the child's expression remained calm. He simply watched in silence, observing the demonic aura surrounding the young man, something that appeared absolutely extraordinary. He noted that the level of magical absorption in that body was astonishing, estimating it surpassed 90% of the available energy. The patriarch then confided that it had not been a wise decision. He said it would have been more sensible to absorb only around 80% of the sacred darkness, as he himself had done. He mentioned that even the family's ancestor, without the blessing of the Demon King's majesty, would never have reached such a level of power. Still, he assured him that the boy could use that power. All he had to do was take his hand, and part of the magic could be turned into void. After hearing what the patriarch had to say, the protagonist, with all due respect, asked to pose a question before accepting anything. He inquired whether that elder believed the family of dark demonic energy had weakened over time. His aunt immediately scolded him, saying that question was inappropriate. However, Christian explained the reason behind it. He wanted to know if the patriarch was implying there was a clear reason behind the decline in the family's prestige. The protagonist stated that there was. According to him, the bloodline of dark demonic energy had prospered more than ever, thanks to that patriarch's benevolence. Nevertheless, some demons still claimed the family was no longer what it once was, and that was due to a single reason: the lack of an absolute, a true warrior of 8 stars or more. As he spoke, the young patriarch continued just watching. Christian insisted, because he knew he was right. When the Demon King invaded his family's home, the former patriarch had already passed away. At that critical moment, there was no one of 8 stars to face the enemy. The presence of an absolute was essential to ensure the bloodline's survival. There was no way the head of the house could ignore that concern. The woman, observing everything closely, noticed when her father finally spoke. He said he understood the young man's restlessness. Even so, Christian continued, he wanted to know if the elder wasn't curious about the future, if he didn't wish to know what could happen from that point forward. He said he could be just a pawn in the hands of the main family, or transcend that challenge, just like a key piece in a game where limits couldn't be measured. A checkmate. winning a match on the very board itself. The patriarch smiled, finding the young man's words beautiful, but he warned him not to regret what he had just said. Then he opened a passage to another place. The protagonist, realizing what was happening, looked down, visibly alarmed. He even started screaming when he realized that portal was sucking him into another dimension. He was soon hurled into a completely different place, a vast forest under a dazzling blue sky. He then heard a voice from above saying his first mission involving dark demonic energy was about to begin. All he had to do was survive. As soon as he heard that, the protagonist felt a terrifying presence behind him. Turning around cautiously, he came face to face with a two-headed creature, drooling eagerly to devour him. While the young man faced that beast in this mysterious place, everything was being transmitted directly to the patriarch. The scene was displayed like a spectacle within his crystal sphere. His daughter suspected that, once again, her father was willing to restart that ancestral mission. She questioned him about the level 4 beasts, which made the patriarch want to make things even more difficult. He inserted a new enemy into that dimension, a stone lizard. Now Christian had something else to focus his attention on. The woman, realizing what her father had done, understood it was all a consequence of her own comment. She apologized in her mind, regretful. The patriarch knew that by fighting for survival, the boy would eventually come face to face with his true essence. Being on the brink of death made it easier to gain deeper and faster understanding of one's strength. Even so, he hoped the boy wouldn't suffer any serious injury. He sat down to watch everything through the crystal ball and decided to wait. He just wanted to relax and enjoy the show. He asked his daughter to bring him something tasty to eat, and she prepared a tray of sweets. Excited, he began to enjoy the treats, which had been his favorite since his youth. He said that whenever he used powerful magic, he ended up feeling an uncontrollable craving for sweets. Right afterward, he snapped his fingers and dimmed the room. He thought it was better to watch the display in a cozier atmosphere. As he settled in, all he wanted was to observe his grandson's training. He saw that now the boy would have to face not only the two-headed bear, but also the stone lizard. The protagonist, facing both enemies, thought that if he were struck even once, he might end up with a few broken bones. But before he could finish that thought, the lizard launched a greenish jet in his direction. It was poison. The protagonist, with agility and sharp reflexes, dodged the attack. Upon observing the tree that had been hit, he realized the liquid was not only poisonous but also corrosive. He imagined a single mistake could cost him his life. He tried asking the patriarch if he was listening to him, but the elder simply watched in silence without answering. Meanwhile, Christian spoke to himself, saying he knew the patriarch would never give him a dead-end mission. His aunt, however, believed the grandfather wasn't as kind as the grandson thought. The young man kept asking questions. He wanted to know if the real goal was to make him figure out a way to defeat a magical beast infinitely more powerful than himself. The aunt, however, knew her father well and understood that, deep down, he just wanted to see his grandson get beaten up a lot. Even so, the young man was determined to discover how far his strength could go, and for that reason, he chose to face that fight against the two creatures. Now he would have to battle those beasts, but he was determined to win. He knew the power of those creatures was immense, and their speed was nothing to scoff at either. So he would need to pay attention to the smallest details, observe carefully, and find an opening to act. When that moment finally came, he would use his magic to neutralize them all at once. As the battle progressed, the patriarch observed the young man closely and soon realized he truly possessed an unusual talent. His movements were completely different from those who had come before. However, the aunt, deeply worried about her nephew, spoke to her father and asked him to go easy, as he was still just a child in the end. But soon enough, Christian showed that he hadn't come there to play. He was determined to take advantage of every inch of that space for his training. He left both his aunt and grandfather stunned by managing to bring down the first monster. Curious, the patriarch asked the young man how he had managed to capture that beast. Christian replied that the creature had high physical strength and solid defense, but it was slow and not very resistant to demonic energy. He explained that he took advantage of a moment of carelessness, a tiny opening, to strike precisely. At that moment, he injected demonic energy directly into the creature's heart. The woman was visibly shaken, as she knew that was the very technique her own father used in the past. Simon, who was also watching the scene, was impressed. That was dark annihilation. The butler, surprised, asked if that wasn't precisely the technique his master used to employ. But the patriarch was now more interested in seeing how the protagonist would deal with the second opponent, the stone reptile. That challenge would be even tougher. The stone lizard was agile, and on top of that, had a highly potent venom spray it could launch at any moment. That would make Christian's movements even more difficult, though he still needed to display all his agility and intelligence. However, the reptile had no intention of making things easier for the boy. Christian then devised a strategy. He knew the lizard had 3 rock-made hearts, which made it extremely resilient. Even if one of them were destroyed, the other 2 would keep the monster alive. So it was necessary to neutralize all 3 at once, or the creature would just keep regenerating. With that in mind, he opted for a different approach. He used his demonic energy to create a sort of net, like an ordinary trap, but with a far more specific purpose. The idea was to catch the lizard and restrain its movements long enough to destroy the 3 cores simultaneously. When the plan worked and the hearts were shattered at the same time, the reptile finally collapsed. Simon noticed that this was an adapted version of the dark annihilation technique. In short, everyone was thrilled to see the protagonist fighting like that. The The butler, curious, asked if his master had taught that to the boy, but the patriarch replied no, as that was not a technique one could simply teach. The butler reflected that, if he kept going down that path, Christian might not even need to learn the traditional arts of demonic energy. Then the grandfather's voice echoed through the skies of the beautiful forest, announcing that the test had ended. With that, Christian was once again enveloped by a portal and taken back to the room where everyone awaited him. While the patriarch praised him in a contained manner, the young man said he had learned something truly valuable. He thanked them for the opportunity, as he had understood for himself the practical applications of demonic energy. However, his grandfather didn't want him to become arrogant. He said that from that point on, the true transmission of the art would begin. He asked everyone to leave, leaving only himself and Christian in the room. The butler and the aunt obeyed, although the woman still seemed uncomfortable leaving her nephew alone. With the room silent, the patriarch began explaining the first stage of the transmission of the demonic art. Christian needed to understand, at its core, what demonic energy truly was. He would have to learn how to dominate the enemy through perfect darkness. Then, the patriarch questioned him directly. In his view, what would perfect darkness be? The question caught the protagonist off guard. He remained silent for a few moments, reflecting on a possible answer. Noticing his hesitation, the grandfather, still with his childlike appearance, asked him to simply watch. He then began a kind of magical intonation, slowly reciting an incantation. The atmosphere around them changed drastically, becoming denser, as if the very air was charged with power. Each word spoken made the environment shift even more. Christian watched in awe as his grandfather, using only one hand, conjured something unusual and powerful. During the summoning, the patriarch's eyes took on a deep and intense red glow. Moments later, it looked as though a new portal would open, until the colors swirled in the air, and finally, a sword made of pure energy appeared before them. The patriarch swung that weapon forged of demonic energy, materialized before his grandson so that he could see it clearly. Christian opened his eyes wide, feeling as if he were witnessing something straight out of fairy tales or ancient legends. It was as if his very consciousness had been torn apart by a new truth. Now he was determined to try and recreate it. It felt as though a primordial truth had been forced down his throat, a deep, undeniable knowledge. He felt as if someone had passed by and sliced his neck, even if it was all just a vivid impression. After all, that was the concept sword, which only cut what it intended to cut. The aura it radiated was a direct product of the demonic art of the Black Sword. The patriarch then dismissed the sword with a simple act of will. He looked straight at the boy and declared that he had 1 month. That would be the time Christian had to perfect the sword he had just witnessed. After that, the patriarch left the young man alone so that he could try to reproduce the technique properly. Now the protagonist looked around, a bit confused and disoriented. He knew he needed to gather his thoughts and plan a way to reinvent that energy sword for his own use. During training, the protagonist felt the need to strengthen his body. With that goal in mind, he started running with the intention of exhausting his muscles to the limit. In addition, he began doing push-ups and other physical activities. However, upon examining his own physique, he realized it wasn't changing as much as he'd hoped. He figured he would have to push himself even harder in his exercises to reach the physical condition he wanted. So he understood that he needed to redirect his focus to the body and return to training with more discipline, while still trying to replicate the sword. After resting for a bit, he began training by gathering energy in the palm of his hand, attempting to recreate the sword he had seen. Despite numerous attempts, it would almost manifest. But then, moments later, it vanished as if made of mist. No matter how hard he tried, he still hadn't figured out the secret to making it last longer. As he had suspected, it wasn't going to be easy. There had already been many failed attempts. Even when he managed to summon it, he could barely maintain it for more than 10 seconds. On top of that, the sword he created looked completely different from the black sword the patriarch had shown so perfectly. He knew the darkness used was more powerful and essential, and so he recalled the words the elder had spoken. He remembered a kind of enchantment the man had recited, so he began to visualize that same spell. He was sure there was a hidden secret within that invocation, and so he spent an entire month dedicated to it. After that time, the elder returned to the place where he had left the protagonist, this time with his daughter. He believed the boy must have realized his own limits after so many failed attempts. He noticed his daughter was extremely worried about her nephew and asked her to calm down. Still, the woman wanted to know from her father if there wasn't a faster path, since there were just over 2 months left until the grand test. As strange as it seemed, the patriarch said that even with the purity of the dark power the boy had acquired, rapid progress wasn't possible. They were still talking when they noticed the young man standing in front of them. The patriarch could hardly believe what his eyes were seeing. Right before him, the protagonist held the sword he was supposed to have replicated. The patriarch, just like his daughter, knew that was the sword the boy had finally succeeded in reproducing. Smiling, Christian said that thanks to his grandfather's teachings, he had reached the 3rd book much faster than he expected. As he spoke, the sword disappeared, something that was already happening frequently. He explained to the patriarch that, as he could see, he still couldn't maintain it for long, but that was the best result he had achieved so far. He said it took him about a week to manifest the black sword, but he considered it just an empty shell. After hearing the elder's mysterious incantation, he began to realize something was off. He noticed there was something special and mysterious about the spell the man had mentioned. That's when the patriarch realized the young man had succeeded in evoking the true sword, something that completely exceeded all expectations. And more than that, he had fully understood the purpose of the exercise, something that would normally take an entire year just to begin manifesting. Maybe even an entire lifetime wouldn't be enough to fully understand the 12 types of magical energy. But the protagonist had truly achieved that feat in just a month, now displaying a genuine sword before them. That young man was truly promising, even if the sword still disappeared and reappeared several times. That reignited hope in the old man, who believed that, at the end of the forbidden magic path, he had finally found someone worthy. He told the young man that, starting the next day, he should prepare himself, as he would begin learning something even more difficult. Christian looked radiant upon hearing that he could advance to more complex techniques. Amid enthusiastic shouts, he said he fully trusted the patriarch's teachings. He was satisfied, as everything had gone exactly as he had imagined. He believed he was about to go through a difficult phase, and that made him even more determined and happy. Now he wanted to celebrate with expensive drinks and lots of alcohol, celebrating everything he had achieved so far. When he arrived at his favorite wine cellar, he was extremely excited. All those bottles were before him, ready to be tasted. He picked up a bottle in his hands and could hardly believe he would finally taste the flavor of victory. The problem was that he needed to drink in secret from Maya, because if she found out, she would probably snatch the bottle and scold him. Just as he was holding the bottle, someone called out to him. Trying to hide it, he turned around to see who it was. The person asked if he was already drinking in the middle of the day, as if he still intended to keep up those habits. He looked at the woman and noticed she was a 3-star level mage. From the tone of her eyes, she seemed to be a dark mage. When the protagonist asked if she happened to know him, the young woman looked visibly offended. Her expression showed that she thought he was mocking her, like so many others had done. She said it was bastards like him who made her lose her patience. Overcome with anger, she gave him a strong slap to the face, as if to see whether he would do anything in front of a lady. The slap was so intense that it knocked him to the ground. She was truly furious. Meanwhile, the servant assigned to accompany her asked that they leave, saying that such trash didn't deserve her lady's attention. The protagonist remained on the ground, bottle in hand, rubbing his face, still feeling the sting of the slap. He told Sebastian what had happened and wanted to know who that girl was to act with such rudeness. The man replied that she was Marisa from the House of Poison Magic, and then took the bottle from his hands. Christian, stunned, could hardly believe they were talking about none other than the House of Poison Magic. He felt regret, as he hadn't known he had mistreated his own fiancée, or rather, his ex-fiancée. When he heard that the woman was his fiancée, Christian could hardly believe it. However, he was quickly reminded that she was already his ex-fiancée. Full of anger, the young woman left the presence of the protagonist. She walked briskly through the corridors without even looking back. Her expression was serious, but not a word left her lips. She remained silent, immersed in her own thoughts. She remembered the ants she used to observe in the garden when she was a child. She liked to watch them when she was about 8 years old. Bored, she would spend hours sitting with her doll in her lap, just observing the little insect. At that time, she thought that, either way, everyone around her only cared about her brother and completely ignored her. She constantly heard adults commenting that she was just a bastard, born out of wedlock, the result of one of her father's passing whims. They believed the father only paid her attention because his legitimate son was useless, and so he tried to compensate by investing in her. While she was sitting in the grass, watching the ants, she noticed someone approaching. She thought it would be just another person who would ignore her or mock her cruelly, so she just hugged her doll tighter. That was when, for the first time, she saw a young Christian who approached calling her a brat and asked what she was doing alone out there. That behavior was unexpected. Someone her age had come up and started a conversation with her. At the time, Marisa replied, a little angrily, saying she wasn't a brat and that her name was Marisa. Christian introduced himself and said he was the son of Count Khazar. He said adults were all annoying and that she shouldn't pay any attention to them. He told her to wait until she grew up, because then she could fight back against everything they were doing to her. Marisa, outraged at the world around her, said she would take revenge on everyone, become a powerful mage, and shut each of them up. Upon hearing that, Christian smiled. He thought that girl had impressive ambition. He said that was exactly the spirit a mage from the dark magic clan should have, and that warmed the girl's heart. He also said that if she truly intended to become the strongest of all, then he needed to treat her with respect from the very beginning. He began calling her the future Supreme Mage and extended his hand to her. He asked her to accept the honor of being formally introduced to the clan of dark magic. That gesture was something unexpected for Marisa. No one had ever been that kind to her. Overcome with emotion, she accepted his hand, held it firmly, and thanked him. And so, the two began a tour of the mansion. That was the memory running through Marisa's mind at that moment. The Christian she had met seemed very different from the man she had just seen now. She thought all of that belonged to the past, even if the engagement had been sealed through the alliance between their two families. Even so, back then, she had waited anxiously, dreaming of a future by her fiance's side. But the news about Christian had been awful. They said he was a drunken bastard, always involved in trouble. After so many disappointments, she decided she would no longer be naive enough to fall for fairy tales. He would never change. She was tired of it all and had decided to put a final end to their engagement. Deep in thought, she opened the doors to the Marcus office. She needed to discuss something serious with him. The man, wearing glasses and examining some documents, received her coldly, as he did with everyone. Still, she greeted him politely, saying it had been a long time since they last saw each other. He asked her what brought her there. Marisa said that, as he probably already knew, a magical artifact had been discovered in the neutral zone between their two families. The acting patriarch confirmed he had already been informed and asked what the House of Poisonous Magic intended to do about it. He wanted to know if they would agree to share the artifact, since the last one had remained with them. The woman replied that it wouldn't be possible. If it were the Dark Clan, they wouldn't give it up either. The Marcus found that fair, and so she proposed an honest competition. She suggested that each house send an exploration team, and whoever found the artifact first would keep it. That way, they could avoid unnecessary bloodshed and a direct confrontation between the houses. She remarked that the situation among the constellations of the Four Kings had also been unstable lately. The Marquis, tapping his fingers on the table as usual, agreed with the proposal. He said he accepted the terms, but his quick answer gave Marisa a strange feeling. Something didn't seem right, and her instincts kicked in. He then said he had only one condition. She paid close attention. The condition was that if the House of Poisonous Magic broke the agreement, they would lose not only that artifact, but also the previous one. Marisa was intrigued. How could he claim they would betray the agreement? He replied by saying that her house specialized in poisons and treacherous traps, and that naturally raised suspicions. It was a provocation, a verbal trap meant to throw her off and make her accept without thinking. And that was exactly what happened. Seeing that he already had the upper hand, the Marquis asked if she would personally lead the House of Poisonous Magic's team. She confirmed that this had been her plan from the start. He said that, in that case, he would finally see the famous little lady of 10,000 poisons in action. As she turned to leave, Marisa declared that she would await the rival clan's team on the day of the expedition. As she walked away, the Marquis simply watched her. His plan was nearly complete. He rose from his chair and slowly walked over to a game board set to the side. Gazing at the board, he already had all the moves in mind. He studied each piece's position carefully. That wasn't just a strategy game. It was a reflection of the lives of everyone around him. With a calculated move, he shifted one of the pieces. It was a play that would topple Marisa. At the same time, it would allow him to discard Jupian, who only had value when beside his brother. Since he was now incapacitated, the Marquis had managed to eliminate 2 targets with a single move. He toyed with everyone's lives as if they were mere pawns on his board. He believed he had prepared the perfect stage for his spectacle. 2 months had passed since that conversation, and the seasons had changed as well. While Christian intensified his training, the paths of many others also began to shift in new directions. Someone was struggling with a heart full of confusion over an old love, and that person was Marisa, shaken after seeing Christian. The loser of the competition had been cast aside, as no one paid attention to Loin anymore. On the other hand, the Ice of Envy sharpened its blade, and the Marcus' second son had no intention of letting such humiliation go unpunished. Amid all this, someone had begun acting discreetly, preparing for the approaching future. Several scenarios and countless lives would change, but the moment had come when Christian returned, now face to face with the Marcus. It was his chance to prove himself worthy, and in front of everyone, he summoned the Dark Sword. That act made the second prince harbor even more hatred for Christian, willing to do anything against him. The protagonist believed that just seeing Ashid's expression had already made all the effort to materialize that sword worth it. However, he couldn't reveal the true sword, as he had been warned by his grandfather that doing so might lead to an even harder task. Until that moment, he thought he had endured everything as advised, but just imagining the Marcus' surprise made him anxious. Even when faced with the undeniable, the Marquis merely stated that Christian had some talent. Then, the Marquis announced what the next mission would be, informing them that soon they would need to send mages to retrieve an artifact. Christian listened attentively, and thought it would be easier to just go look for the artifact, asking if he should go alone. The Marcus then clarified that he would be part of the troop led by the second princess, Jupian. He also said that the mission originally belonged to Loin, so Christian should consider himself fortunate. He added that this was an honor, as Christian was above the required level for that specific task. The protagonist simply thanked him for the new opportunity, turned around, and began walking without hesitation. However, the Marcus' second son remained concerned about the possible attention Christian might attract. A man near him said it wasn't time to worry, as there were no concrete reasons. Everything was going according to plan. He revealed that he had a strategy, and everything was progressing as expected. They only needed to wait for the right moment. Upon leaving, Christian believed he would be sent on a high-risk mission, but everything seemed much simpler than expected. He reflected and remembered that the mission originally belonged to Loin, or at least that was what the Marcus had told him. He began to think more clearly and tried to recall what had happened in the original timeline. If things had unfolded as before, Loin would have been assigned to that mission, not Christian. However, during the Great War, Loin was never mentioned again, which made doubts begin to surface in his mind. He then remembered an old story he had heard a long time ago. In his past life, back when he was still Chris, he used to stroke a talking fox to get information from her. The fox refused to speak unless Chris gently brushed her fur. After giving in to her request, she told him about a conflict over an artifact between the Dark Magic clan and the House of Poisonous Magic. At the time, the conflict didn't gain notoriety outside the circles involved. Even with the complete destruction of the Dark Magic clan's troop, the Poisonous Magic House also suffered losses, but both sides silenced the event for unknown reasons. What mattered was that the incident had been the seed of a great calamity. The protagonist back then wanted to understand the case better, and the fox explained that everything started with the patriarch. He met a tragic end at the hands of his own son, the Marquis Langham. If not for that, the Demon King wouldn't have conquered the Dark Magic clan so easily. In the end, Christian concluded that during that event, the amulet had triggered the beginning of the era of ruin. The Dark Clan's troop was completely wiped out, and instead of Loin being among the dead, now fate would be altered. In Loin's place, it would be Christian who became a pawn in a conspiracy, stabbed in the back. The name of the eldest son of House Khazar was now involved, and that's why the mission seemed far too simple. The Marquis had done everything on purpose so Christian would accept becoming part of an intricate conspiracy. Even so, he still lacked concrete proof, so acting rashly would be an extremely risky mistake. Besides, he was only a 3-star mage and doubted his ability to take immediate action, but he would remain alert. He was about to leave when a female voice asked him to wait, making it clear she still had unfinished business with him. With her arms crossed, she called him in a provocative tone, questioning where he thought he was going. Christian replied that he didn't owe explanations about his whereabouts to someone like her. She then remarked that she had heard rumors he was also assigned to that mission. When she heard the protagonist mocking Loin, she completely lost her composure and threw a dagger at him. Calculating the trajectory, she hurled the weapon with precision and continued to watch the path it would take. The protagonist followed with his eyes what she was observing, focusing on the dagger's trajectory. He had already realized beforehand that the dagger hadn't been thrown to hit him, so he simply followed its path with his eyes. There was no need to dodge, as it was clear the target was something behind him. The young woman widened her eyes, thinking she had startled him, but quickly realized the effect was the opposite. Christian said they had exchanged enough greetings already and stepped away. With a wave of his hand, he pushed the sword even deeper into the rock. He asked the girl to stay out of his line of sight and move away, warning that he had other matters to attend to. He left her behind while she tried to recover her dagger, now embedded even deeper in the rock. As she did so, she felt a deep contempt for that young man, mainly because she knew he had followed the movement of the dagger with his eyes and still hadn't even bothered to dodge. She believed he had realized she had purposely missed, and that made her hate him even more. Meanwhile, in the marketplace village near the Celestial Demon Clan, the protagonist was strolling through the streets without a care. As soon as he could, he grabbed a mug of beer and opened his mouth wide, as if he could already taste it. However, he was pulled by someone who placed a hand over his mouth, preventing him from drinking. The only thing they allowed him at that moment were a few rounds of a luck-based game, which he had always enjoyed. This happened as an act of revenge, since the waiters had refused to serve him any drinks, forcing him to settle for a few skewers. He wished he could spend the rest of his life just eating and resting, as it had been a long time since he'd taken a break for himself. While eating, he thought that the shop of that one guy should be somewhere nearby, maybe on a side street, but he soon realized that before moving on, he needed to shake off someone who had been stealthily following him. At first, he believed they were subordinates of the Marquis, but he was in for a surprise. He barely noticed when a hand emerged from an alley, covered his mouth, and pulled him in abruptly. He was dragged by feminine hands into the alley, while the person tried to keep them quiet. She simply pointed in the direction she wanted him to go, asking that he trust her somehow. Looking up, he saw that the person had long hair and striking green eyes. Right after, she told him to be careful, saying he was being followed, although she claimed her subordinates had already taken care of the pursuers. The protagonist, however, didn't believe that someone who had dragged him and covered his mouth only wanted to protect him. When he asked who she was, the woman introduced herself as Sion, from the Castle of the Four Kings. She said she was someone trying to contain the disturbing signs that had spread throughout the castle. She suggested they change locations for now, and asked him to come with her without resistance. He simply asked her to go ahead and said he would follow. Shortly after, they walked through a narrow alley. The protagonist asked how far she intended to take him and where exactly this entrance she had mentioned was. Sion revealed that lately, many mages from the Castle of the Four Kings had been mysteriously disappearing. Even zones that had once been considered safe were being destroyed one by one, and that area was marked by conflict. That place was ruled by fear, and the heads of the families didn't care about the lives or deaths of ordinary mages. That was why they had decided it was necessary to eliminate that criminal organization with the support of several allied families. But of course, Sion wasn't asking for help for free, as she offered information that could calm the storm forming over the Dark Magic clan. Christian then noticed that she wore rather distinctive high heels, which contrasted with her stealthy behavior. The woman stated that the Marquis was in collusion with an important figure from the Poisonous Magic House. She showed great interest in eliminating Princess Marisa, who belonged to that same house. To the protagonist, it was strange that they didn't want to eliminate just him, but also Marisa, which raised suspicion. If both families were weakened, the leaders of the Castle of the Four Kings would gain more space and influence. In the end, the balance between the 12 magical families would be seriously threatened, and that was why Sion hoped he would prepare properly. She also wanted him to take on the role of young master of the Dark Magic clan and face those threatening the peace. The protagonist thought that, if that woman knew, he could become young master through an expedition. Then her access to information was impressive. Even so, he refused immediately, saying he couldn't trust someone who had no proof. If she wanted his cooperation, she should at least offer some kind of guarantee. The woman thought the demand was excessive, believing she didn't need to go that far to convince him. But the protagonist stood firm, saying that without guarantees or concrete evidence, he wasn't willing to get involved. Then she pulled something from her sleeve. It looked important, and she offered it as proof of her word. She extended her hand with the object and asked him to keep it as a sign of trust. The protagonist looked at it closely, and after some thought, decided to help her in that cause. After taking the object she offered, he politely said goodbye, as their paths were about to go in different directions. Seong watched him leave. She felt her mission in that place had been fulfilled. She turned and, with her elegant steps, departed silently. Her energy gradually began to shift. She asked someone why she couldn't show her true form to Christian at that moment. A dark voice responded that it was for her own good, because if he were captured, he wouldn't be able to mention her. The woman remarked that, thinking about it, that demonic being might actually be right. For now, they should simply continue observing events. Soon after, that person assumed her original form. Her hair turned red, and her eyes gained a violet hue. She was Idrain. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued his stroll through the city as he needed to find something specific. His eyes rested on the card he had received as a sign of trust, and he was completely ecstatic. That was truly a gift from the heavens, and it had come at a perfect time. It was a pass to the Shadow Auction, a secret black market that sold smuggled artifacts and rare animals, accessible only to nobles or wealthy individuals with verified identity. He remembered how difficult it had been, in his past life, to obtain a card that granted access to that market. Now he had one in hand. He didn't recognize the name mentioned on the card, but recalled what was said about the Marcumanist being in collusion with an important figure. He still didn't know exactly who that mysterious person was, so he couldn't trust her too much. For now, the best thing to do was prepare cautiously for whatever awaited him in that place. So he asked someone nearby if it was possible to send a carrier pigeon. After receiving confirmation, he began to write a letter that would be sent to someone he still didn't fully trust. As soon as the bird's owner received the note, he prepared it properly for delivery. Shortly after, the protagonist watched the bird take flight with his letter. Soon, measures would be taken. He felt relieved as everything was ready, and he believed now was the ideal time to find that person. The person he referred to was someone who wore glasses, enjoyed fine wine, and whose presence was always shrouded in mystery. After deciding he would seek out that person, the protagonist headed to an extremely luxurious place. He was stopped at the door by a man who told him that such a place wasn't suitable for someone with such a plain appearance. However, when he showed the card he had received, he already knew the treatment would immediately change. The doorman, upon seeing the card, was stunned to realize that someone like Christian had one of those. From that moment on, he was taken directly to a reserved area, and the doors opened to someone of such importance. Upon entering, he noticed that everything was extremely bright and shiny, as if he were in a true empire of luxury and power. He was soon greeted by someone who asked if he was Leiuria of Wolfman. Holding the card and displaying his VIP status, the protagonist asked if there was a problem with his presence. The attendant found the voice and appearance strange, thinking he looked like a man, but chose not to get involved. Then Christian asked the young man to take him to the branch manager, as he wished to speak with him directly. When the man remained frozen, the protagonist repeated the request firmly, demanding to speak with the branch manager. While waiting to be received, Christian sat comfortably on one of the available sofas. He watched the attendant walk away, saying he would return shortly with the person in charge. He noted that everything there was top tier, just as one would expect from the Rodolph Goods Guild. The Rodolph Guild was one of the largest in the empire, rivaling even the Union Servants Guild, so influential that it controlled entire black markets. While waiting, the protagonist thought that if even Rodolph couldn't help him, then no one else could. Soon, the auction house manager and also the leader of the Rodolph Guild appeared and introduced himself as Rubid. After introducing himself, he calmly sat down, wanting to know the reason the young man had asked to meet him. He was then surprised when Christian stated he wanted to be taken to the ruins. Rubid was completely stunned upon hearing that, and the young man insisted, asking if he didn't know Ruin. The manager replied that he did know her, that she was the master of the Servants Guild, but said that not even they could summon her easily. Christian looked at him with suspicion and stated that the woman he was looking for was standing right in front of him. Rubid tried to dodge the subject, saying he didn't understand what he was talking about, but Christian suggested it might be an effect of the relic. Watching the man stumble over excuses, he said it all seemed a bit too convenient. He explained that servants showed up frequently, so it would be better to stop pretending and just tell the truth already. Faced with his persistence, the transformation finally took place right before the protagonist's eyes. The woman who had been hiding behind the disguise revealed her true identity as the leader of the guild. She asked how he had found out, and Christian simply smiled subtly. He thought he recognized her because that woman had tormented him in his past life, so he knew her all too well. Naturally, he had taken back everything she had stolen and more, several times over. He asked if she wasn't ashamed to use such a mediocre relic to disguise herself as the head of the Rodolph Guild. He even added that, at best, The disguise was incredibly sloppy. Those words left the woman completely shaken, but of course he was just bluffing, since there was no way to actually break the relic's effect. He even suggested that maybe her face was too big to be hidden, though he knew that wasn't quite the case. The woman shot back, saying that he wasn't Lady Rhea of Wolfman either, and remarked that he wasn't building much of a reputation in that place. Much had been said about his refined style and other qualities, but judging by his behavior, he hadn't come that far yet. In response, the protagonist threatened her, saying he could spread rumors about a Union agent doing business in the Dark Empire. The woman trembled upon hearing this, considering his words a direct and dangerous affront. Furious, she stared at the young man and asked what exactly he wanted from her. After a long conversation, he left the place covered in jewels, rare essences, and extremely high-quality items. At the door, he paused for a moment just to mentally brag about everything he had managed to get from that meeting. The woman, after much reluctance, agreed to provide the equipment he had requested, sealing the deal. Christian was satisfied, because even though he had used a light bluff, it was all to prevent the end of the world. So it was worth it. He knew money wouldn't drastically increase anyone's power, but at least this was all within the Marcus' plans. Leaving the place, he passed by some youths training with swords. He walked right past them as if nothing was happening, clearly in a hurry to get somewhere. One of the young men stopped him and asked if he was going to join the training, but Christian immediately declined. The team mentioned they'd be ready to depart in 2 days and that he should participate too. He replied that he preferred to remain just as useless as Loin, and so he'd stay quiet. With a slight farewell gesture, he told the red-haired boy they should focus on working hard. Even with the others trying to convince him, Christian told them to leave him alone, as he wasn't interested at the moment. He heard someone say he wasn't worth the trouble, and that it would be better to let him go. If there was no gain, not even a doctor could fix him. Despite that, he seemed arrogant and unconcerned, as if that task had no importance whatsoever. After a night's rest, the next day the protagonist was impressed. His contact had managed to get everything he needed. The leader of the Rodolph Guild wanted to know what he planned to do with all those items, but Christian said there was no need to know. He then asked where the rest of the things he had requested were, and they showed him a briefcase. Upon opening it, he saw the items didn't look very elegant, but he knew it wasn't the time to be picky. As he left, they said they didn't understand the protagonist's intentions, but wished for his identity to remain secret. Christian, however, stated that soon they would be serving the same purpose, while the woman preferred to never see him again. Right after, he warned that a war might break out soon, which immediately got the other party's attention. He commented that if she really moved between the Union and the Magic Empire, she should know the continent's stability was hanging by a thread. If the war truly started and the routes were blocked, even choosing a side would become difficult. Still, the woman thought it was an exaggeration to speak of war, since conflicts of that magnitude weren't child's play. But the protagonist said that, considering the recent rumors, nothing about the Demon King's castle seemed absurd anymore. Among informants, it was said that the atmosphere in the castle had been extremely tense lately. Many families were supporting an offensive against the Union, and that merchant knew it better than anyone. He wanted to understand why Christian was revealing all of that so suddenly, because it couldn't just be to prevent a war. However, Christian proposed that he become his sponsor, someone willing to help build a future where war could be avoided. The man found the proposal strange and asked what he really intended to do with all of this. Christian explained that, as he should know, the Demon King's castle could only start a war if it passed through the southern kingdom of dark mages. If he became the heir to that kingdom and prepared accordingly, he could stop the advance before it even began. Additionally, the merchant's profits wouldn't be cut in half, which made the proposal even more appealing. Christian asked whether he was willing to believe or not, and if he truly wanted to form a partnership. To the merchant, the way Christian laid everything out seemed to leave no viable alternative, especially since his eyes were filled with sincerity, like someone who had faced war directly. The merchant thought that perhaps it was worth investing in that proposal, not just to save half, but to protect everything he had. And so, the two formed a pact, shook hands, and a new alliance was born. The merchant warned that if trust were broken, even just once, he would withdraw immediately. As the merchant walked away, Christian waved and wished him a safe journey. Some time later, while preparing ingredients, the protagonist was already drenched in sweat, but he knew he couldn't stop halfway. He was aware that even the high venom mage was involved, so he had to prepare an excellent antidote. As he watched the potion boil, he recalled that it had been a long time since he had made anything like that. The sight of the kettle over the fire brought back old memories of the noble medical clan from a long-forgotten era. Back then, he would fan the fire intensely to finish an antidote under the watchful gaze of a woman. The one who told him to fan harder was the last descendant of the healer bloodline. She said that certain ingredients would only release their properties under intense fire, and he obeyed in silence. That woman was the leader of the clan, and her name was Ella. Christian sweated in front of the fire, listening to her instructions without question. It was the first time they met, still during the First War, right on the battlefield. Even though she was young, she had to fight, because the Demon King had exterminated the healer clan. Since the clan was considered the best among the 7 great clans, It became a prime target for annihilation. At that time, Ella was in danger and couldn't even escape the Demon King's blade. She was gravely wounded, and the antidote he was preparing was meant to try to save her. She was the one who taught the protagonist in his past life how to properly make the potion, but he had no hopes, no expressions. He just followed her instructions mechanically. Ella thought he was truly impressive, since a single explanation was enough for him to learn. She felt sad to have met him only at the end of her life. The young man would say that what people called sacred was nothing but a thief of things. Ella thought he was insolent, and even after being attacked by the Demon King, he was still breathing thanks to her medicines. She felt guilty for lying in bed while the world was falling into chaos and destruction. She mourned the end of her clan and the breaking of the healer lineage. Christian, fanning the fire, thought the same. Even so, he said there was nothing more useless than clinging to the past. She needed to focus on recovering because there was still work to be done. The woman placed her hand on a stack of books, the only ones that remained after the Demon King's invasion. Among them were secret arts and the clan's records, everything that could be preserved from destruction. Trying to encourage him, she asked him to carry on the clan, even though she was weak. She held his arm and begged him not to let the clan die. She wanted him to save people in her place. If he could do that, she would be able to pass on in peace. She looked at him, seeking an answer. The young man simply observed her in silence, as if he had already accepted that mission deep within. He gently took her hands and said that from that moment on, she should call him her disciple. The woman smiled in satisfaction. Being called master, even without being able to teach, proved she had chosen well. After she passed, Christian scattered her ashes over a rose garden as a tribute to his mentor. In his current life, he believed he was now the 27th leader of the Healer clan. He had fully mastered the secret art that had survived the ruins, all to fulfill the promise he had made to her. Because of that, he became known as the Saint of the Battlefield, someone who roamed the front lines healing the wounded. In the present, he looked at a small bronze sphere and thought of his master, believing she was now in a better place. Even in this life, he remained determined to fulfill the promise he had made in the previous one. Meanwhile, in the skies, a bird could be seen delivering a letter to a specific location. As agreed, the letter was delivered to Count Khazar, who was pleased to finally receive some news. His son had gone a long time without any direct contact with the family. He already knew through his daughter that the boy had succeeded in obtaining the Black Blade. After reading the letter, he found everything his son had written rather curious, but understood that he had to fulfill all the requests. He called his butler and said it would be necessary to prepare what had been requested. In the mountains at the border between the Dark Clan and the Poison Clan, the day of the expedition had finally arrived. As expected, Christian was the last to arrive, but even so, he raised his hand and announced that he would go alone. He declared that he felt more comfortable acting independently. Furthermore, upon observing the surroundings, it was evident that the Poison Clan had already done a preliminary sweep of the area. He was informed that this was a zone where Class 4 or higher demonic beasts frequently appeared. Christian, however, had a different view of what this mission truly meant. He carried with him a vial containing capsules of an antidote far more effective than the ones offered by the clan. A girl commented that she had already taken her version and didn't need another, but Christian stated that his was superior. He warned her to take the antidote immediately, before it was too late. As he spoke, his ex-Ginsei approached the location, still visibly irritated, and noticed that the two didn't seem to get along. The girl then attempted to start a direct argument with the Poison Princess. She mentioned that she had arrived more than an hour ago, and asked whether she should praise her for not cheating. She then questioned whether the other had already received the rules forbidding traps or ambushes during the exploration. She also complained about the way she was being treated, making it clear she didn't want to be approached casually. The two exchanged intense stares, as if there was something serious to be settled between them. Shortly after stepping away, the leader of the Dark Clan's expedition asked everyone to prepare for departure. Christian, while speaking, tossed the antidote vials to the ground and stated that he would go ahead. The girl, stunned, could only watch him dash off, leaving behind the antidotes and even the communicator. Along the way, he began to face some of the wild beasts that inhabited the region. He knew them well, for he had wandered the demon lands during his past life. He could identify each creature's habitat with his eyes closed, and to reach Class 4 beasts, he needed to go deeper. He recalled that the girl had told him not to expect rescue if anything happened. At first he thought she might be worried, but quickly dismissed the idea. He knew the Marcus plan involved something more, though he still had no concrete evidence lurking nearby. His initial goal was to find the relic, until he realized he was being watched. Marisa was observing him discreetly from behind a bush, but couldn't stay hidden for long. Christian noticed her presence immediately and called her by name. The two remained silent for a few moments. She didn't know what to say after being caught spying. He, in turn, said that maybe he had followed the Poison Clan's route by mistake and apologized. Even suspecting the lie, Marisa told him he should be careful. Christian realized that the young woman was worried about him, but remained with his back turned for a while. Suddenly, his eyes widened, something came to mind, and he realized there was another reason to be concerned with Marisa. The mark is intended to harm her, and now he wondered who in the Poison Clan had enough power to make that happen. Curious, he decided to ask a question and requested that she answer him sincerely. Marisa quickly turned and for a moment thought he was going to talk about their engagement. However, what he asked was whether she was an illegitimate daughter and whether she was hated within her own house. The young woman was deeply hurt, for she knew he already knew the answer and only wanted to provoke her. After reflecting for a moment, Christian realized he had gone too far. When he tried to apologize, mentioning that she reminded him of Rudy, Marisa was already consumed by rage. She fired a blast of poison in his direction and ordered him to stay away. She pointed her finger at him and demanded a formal apology. Christian's eyes widened as he realized she truly expected remorse. The number of vials she carried suggested that this wasn't just about a family dispute. He needed to find out who was behind all of it, because Marisa would remain in danger even within her own clan. He decided to buy time until possible reinforcements arrived and asked if she wasn't violating the rules of the expedition. The girl became furious and demanded that he repeat what he had just said. Christian simply pointed to a tree behind her. There were poison marks on the trunk, clear evidence that the attack had come from her. With that, the Dark Clan could claim a rule violation and easily obtain the relic. He asked Marisa if he was wrong, and even though she was irritated, she admitted he wasn't. However, she stated that he should be punished for insulting her family and grabbed more vials of poison. She said it represented her frustration over the broken engagement and asked if he thought that was self-defense. Without hesitation, she threw all the vials at him at once. Christian simply widened his eyes upon realizing he was about to be hit by all of them. He quickly crossed his arms in front of his face to protect himself from the direct impact. In the middle of the green, toxic mist that now filled the area, he dropped to his knees and began coughing violently. Marisa, satisfied to see him kneeling, said that was her blue flower. With just a snap of her fingers, she could activate the poison already circulating through his veins and demanded that he apologize properly. She said she wanted to see him beg for his life and grabbed 3 more vials of the same substance. She hurled the 3 vials all at once, since he was taking too long to humiliate himself before her. The poisonous mist completely engulfed the area, and he was no longer visible through the smoke, until a hand emerged from the green fog and swiftly grabbed hers. Christian stood up and looked directly into Marisa's eyes. In that moment, he said that maybe he wasn't capable of begging for any reason at all.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.